Chapter 563. As soon as Qin Huayuan and his two younger brothers entered the main hall, they saw the Sun clan quickly walking out to greet them. "Master, did Sister Yi come back? When I was on the street today, I heard people talking about this matter." Qin Huayuan smiled and nodded. "Your Majesty, Hong Yan, arranged for Sister Yi and Wang Yi to live in the imperial manor outside the capital." The Sun clan said, "But won't they come home? Sister Yi got married in June last year. I haven't seen her for almost a year. I really miss her. I don't know if she suffered in the Tayton. I also don't know if Wang Yi still trusts and loves her as much as before." Qin Huayuan saw that the Sun clan was frowning with worry as they spoke, so he smiled and said, "Don't worry. Wang Yi is an official that your Majesty likes. How can he be someone who likes the new and hates the old? Sister Yi should be able to come home soon." At this time, the Sun clan also heard that Qin Huayuan's tone was different from usual. They immediately became alert and nodded with a stiff face. "Yes, Master is right. Your Majesty is a wise ruler, Wang Yi is a loyal official, and Sister Yi isn't an unvirtuous daughter-in-law. There shouldn't be any problems." Qin Huayuan nodded, and the family went to the back to pay their respects to the old madam. The old madam fell ill again a few days ago, so her spirit wasn't very good. In addition, she was too disappointed with Qin Huayuan. Now that she saw Qin Huayuan, she didn't have a good expression. Instead, she doted on her second son. After they saluted, the old madam said, "You're back. Brother Xiu, come sit with mother. It's warm." Second master nodded with a smile and sat in front of the old madam. Second madam also personally brought hot tea for them. The old madam didn't even look at her eldest son and eldest daughter-in-law. She didn't even look at third master. She pulled second master and chatted enthusiastically. Finally, they talked about Prince Zhongxian's return to the capital. "I just heard them say it. Is it true?" Second master's expression froze. Who was so talkative that they actually told the old madam about what happened outside. The old madam's health wasn't good. She needed to rest. The most important thing was that Pang Xiao was sent to the imperial plantation. People who didn't know that your Majesty cared for his subjects, but those who knew that it was a disguised house arrest in disguise. They didn't know what would happen next. They didn't know what would happen next. In that kind of situation, he didn't know if it would implicate the Qin family. Therefore, there must be many pairs of eyes watching the Qin family now. Second old master was very worried that old madam would say something unpleasant that would cause trouble when it reached his Majesty's ears. He immediately looked at Qin Huayuan for help. In the past, his eldest brother was more experienced in dealing with such matters. But now, he couldn't think of how to deal with it. Qin Huayuan received his second master's gaze and said, "Mother, rest well and recuperate. You can't meddle in the matters outside. Asking will only be a waste of time." Hearing this, the old madam immediately said angrily, "What? I don't even have the qualifications to ask. You took away my power to manage the affairs of the general public, and now you want me to be blind, deaf, and mute. You unfilial son." Qin Huayuan said helplessly, "Mother, calm down. Don't get angry. Be careful not to hurt your body." Old madam said, "If you talk less, I might be able to live for a few more years. Besides, I'm talking to Brother Xiu. Why are you interrupting?" The old madam said earnestly to her second master, "There are many rumors outside. They all say that Pang Zhishi failed to live up to your Majesty's good intentions. He betrayed the country and surrendered to the Tayton for a woman. Now that he's back, I don't know how your Majesty will deal with him. Our family is unlucky to have become in-laws with the Pang family. It's all because of Sister Yi, that troublemaker, who brought disaster to our family. Now, looking at your Majesty's attitude, perhaps he will convict the Pang family. Fortunately, only Sister Yi married into the Pang family. I'm wise. I didn't marry Miss 8 to the Pang family. Otherwise, wouldn't something big happen? What I mean is, all of you better behave yourselves and cut off all ties with the Yun family. Don't let them drag you down. Our family has gone through so many ups and downs. It's not easy for us to live a stable life now. I don't want anything to happen to our family because of this matter. I can't afford it. The old madam shook her head as she spoke. She looked as if the heavens had turned their backs on her, but she was still very kind. Madam's son was infuriated when she heard this. If this old madam wasn't Qin Huayuan's biological mother, she would have already slapped her. Ungrateful, despicable, and shameless people were exactly this kind of people. The Sun clan didn't feel like quarreling with this old woman. They also felt that if they angered her to death, it wouldn't be worth it to bear the infamy for her in the future. Therefore, they got up and went out. The old madam looked at the Sun clan's back and sneered. You can't teach your daughter well, and now you're putting on airs with me. Second master, third master, and second madam were very embarrassed. Especially when they saw Qin Huayuan's face become more and more unsightly. Third master persuaded, eldest brother, don't take it to heart. Mother is old and somewhat muddle-headed. When the old madam heard this, she threw a pillow at him on the spot. You're raised by a lowly woman. It's your turn to talk about me. Get out. It was true that third master was a concubine's son, but in the early years of the Dian imperial court, the entire family's expenses, except for Qin Huayuan's and second master's monthly salary, were mostly paid by the third branch. Third master and the late third madam had contributed a lot to the family back then. Now, the old madam actually didn't remember the good at that time and scolded them. Third master couldn't bear it anymore. He stood up and snorted coldly, You said that others can't teach their daughter well. I want to know what kind of person can teach a DI mother like you. Heartless, ungrateful. You never remember what others have done for you. You turn hostile and refuse to recognize them when they're slightly inferior to your thoughts. You actually deserve to be the head of the family. Rebel, rebel. Drive this vile spawn out. There's no need to drive me out. I'm too lazy to look at you. Since you don't treat me as your son, I also don't want to be a part of your family. Third master turned and left. When he reached the door, he said, Eldest brother and second brother also saw it. It's not that I'm unreasonable, but the old madam is really hateful. You two are biological brothers, but you should be on guard. Don't let the old madam instigate dissension. If we three brothers are not united, the family will be broken. The old madam was so angry that she covered her chest with one hand and pointed at third master with the other. She couldn't help but cough. Third master lifted the curtain and went out. Only then did she fiercely spit. At this time, other than Mammy Qin, there was only Qin Huayuan, second master, and his wife left in the room. Qin Huayuan then said, Mother is a smart person. She knows how to judge the situation. I won't say much. Presumably, Mother knows about these things. This son will take his leave first. Qin Huayuan stood up and saluted before retreating. The old madam turned her head and didn't look at Qin Huayuan. However, from the corner of her eyes, she kept looking at his figure as he left. Seeing that he didn't turn back even once, she was even angrier. In the end, he was the son she used to love the most. Now, because of his wife and child, he was separated from her and ignored his efforts all these years. The old madam was overcome with grief. She pulled second master and began to complain tearfully, My life is bitter. After marrying into the family, I didn't have a good life. Back then, your father. Second master could only listen quietly. He felt very helpless in his heart. However, the old madam was his biological mother. When encountering this kind of thing, he couldn't hit or scold her. He could only endure. Second madam had long heard the old madam's complaints. Calluses had already formed in her ears. She was too lazy to pay attention to the increasingly unreasonable old madam. She also quietly retreated. When she lifted the curtain and went out, she saw Qin Huayuan standing in the corridor with his hands behind his back. Second madam sighed softly and walked forward, saying, Eldest uncle, don't be sad. Mother is in the spring and autumn period. She is indeed a bit muddle-headed. Sometimes, her mind isn't clear, so the words she says are probably unintentional. Qin Huayuan greeted second madam. He maintained a distance of 3 steps and said, Younger sister-in-law is right. Whatever mother says, we can't do. As her children, we can only listen. Second madam understood the meaning behind his words. In any case, The decisions in the family weren't made by the old madam. Regardless of what the old madam thought, he could only close the door and abuse his power at home. Second madam said worriedly, Sister Yi has already arrived at the imperial plantation with Wang Yi, right? That's right. Qin Huayuan smiled at second madam and said, Your Majesty is kind-hearted. Our family will be reunited very soon. When they were chatting, Qin Huayuan actually said Your Majesty is kind-hearted every time he opened his mouth. Second madam was alarmed and immediately nodded in agreement, saying, That's right. Your Majesty has always been kind to Wang Yi. At this moment, whether it was Qin Huayuan, second old master, third old master, second madam, or the Sun clan, they all understood in their hearts. Your Majesty's eyes and ears were probably watching the entire in-law family. Their every move would be heard by Your Majesty. If they were already like this at home, then what about Pang Xiao's family, who had just returned to the capital? They didn't know what kind of inescapable net had been set up in the imperial plantation. It was likely that Qin Yining and Pang Xiao were also being closely monitored and had no freedom to speak of. It would be fine if they were being monitored, but the most important thing was that none of them knew what Your Majesty was planning to do next. The entire family seemed to be going on as usual. They were just going through their days in a noisy manner. Qin Huayuan, on the other hand, didn't sleep well the entire night. At this juncture, he didn't dare to inform the in-laws' family. He could only hope that the in-laws' family was smart and wouldn't suddenly appear and be captured by Your Majesty to be used as a hostage to threaten Pang Xiao. When it was time for court the next day, Qin Huayuan and second old master left early and headed straight for the palace. Just as their official sedan arrived in front of the palace gates, they were blocked by a line of Jingji guards. Sirs, please wait for a moment. Prince Zhongshiren and Princess Consort's carriage has arrived. Please wait for a moment before entering. Qin Huayuan, who was sitting upright and resting with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes. He immediately lifted the curtain of the sedan and stood out. He passed through the crowd in front of him. Qin Huayuan saw Pang Xiao's carriage slowly stop not far away. Pang Xiao nimbly dismounted from his horse and then walked to the side of the magnificent carriage that followed closely behind. He personally lifted the beautiful warm curtain and carefully helped Qin Yining, who was dressed to the nines, out of the carriage. Chapter 564. Qin Yining was helped out of the carriage by Pang Xiao. She raised her eyes and looked around. She saw many soldiers from the capital barracks separating the two sides of the road, and the official sedans were blocked on both sides. Your Majesty made such a big scene, but Prince Zhongshiren didn't allow the other official sedans to pass. He even made so many soldiers separate the two sides of the road. Obviously, he wanted to show his favor to Prince Zhongshiren and let everyone present feel the domineering attitude of Prince Zhongshiren. Qin Yining sneered in her heart. She felt that Li Qiqian's methods were becoming more and more petty. She especially liked to play tricks on this kind of thing. She was no different from a woman in the inner courtyard. Pang Xiao saw that Qin Yining's exquisitely made-up face was a little angry. She smiled and comforted her. Sister Yi, don't be like this. Don't let others have their way and hurt yourself. Qin Yining nodded. Ever since she was pregnant, she seemed to be particularly easily affected. This was indeed not good for her health. She helped Pang Xiao out of the carriage. Qin Yining raised her eyes. Suddenly, she saw a pair of familiar eyes through the crowd. It was her father. That pair of eyes, which were very similar to hers, was now full of joy and care. Across the crowd, he stretched his neck and anxiously wanted to see her situation clearly. Qin Yining's tears suddenly came, and she almost cried on the spot. Her father was such an outstanding person, like a banished immortal. Now, like thousands of fathers in the world, he was excitedly looking forward to his child. Seeing that Qin Huayuan had lost a lot of weight, Qin Yining felt very guilty in her heart. Something happened to her this time. Her father must be very anxious. Qin Yining knew about the chaotic situation at home, even if others didn't say anything. Her father might have been under all kinds of pressure and still protected her as before. Qin Yining's tears welled up in her eyes. She wanted to walk to Qin Huayuan's side. Qin Huayuan smiled and nodded at her, but waved his hand, indicating that she shouldn't go over. He could see that his daughter had gone through a lot of hardships. Although she had lost a lot of weight and looked weaker than before, Pang Xiao's attitude towards her was still the same as before. It was obvious that Pang Xiao didn't mind that Qin Yining had been kidnapped to the Titan at all. In Qin Huayuan's opinion, as long as the couple was of one mind, he would be very satisfied. Pang Xiao followed Qin's line of sight and saw Qin Huayuan. Although many civil and military officials were present before the court meeting, Pang Xiao thought about it. Anyway, the current situation was already like this. Moreover, with his deployment, Your Majesty would probably deeply hate his faction in the future. Qin Huayuan was his father-in-law. With Your Majesty's character, he would definitely divide him into his faction. Therefore, Pang Xiao didn't avoid it. He simply took Qin Yining's hand and walked towards Qin Huayuan. The crowd couldn't help but look over. The scene was silent for a moment. Qin Huayuan frowned at first, then figured it out. He looked at Pang Xiao and Qin Yining with a smile. Qin Shuyuan pulled Qin Huayuan worriedly. "Big brother, don't worry." Qin Huayuan comforted him. At this time, Pang Xiao and Qin Yining had already arrived in front of them. Even the soldiers of the Jingji guards made way for them. Qin Yining and Pang Xiao walked side by side to Qin Huayuan and saluted together. Father-in-law. Okay, you may rise." Qin Huayuan supported them with each hand. He first smiled at Pang Xiao, then looked at Qin Yining and said, "You've lost weight. But it's good that you can come back." "Yes. Father, I'm very good. Fortunately, Wang Yi arrived in time this time. Although I experienced a thrilling experience, I'm not seriously injured." That's good. Qin Huayuan smiled and nodded repeatedly. Qin Yining and Pang Xiao saw Qin Shuyuan on the side. "Second uncle." Okay. It's good that you're safe. Qin Shuyuan was also very happy, and his eyes were already red. Pang Xiao said, "Father-in-law, you don't have to worry. Although Sister Yi was kidnapped and experienced a lot of difficulties, she is smart and strong. She can always turn danger into safety. Now that Sister Yi is 3 months pregnant, father-in-law will be able to hold your grandson by the end of the year." Qin Huayuan and Qin Shuyuan were both stunned. Qin Huayuan couldn't help but secretly calculate. He was sure that Qin Yining's child was Pang Xiao's. His daughter was not defiled by the Titan, nor was she disliked by his son-in-law. He immediately nodded happily, and even threw away the immortal aura he had for many years. He laughed and said, Okay. Let's go home later. We'll eat well. You're too thin like this." Qin Shuyuan also said happily, "Yes, your mother and your second aunt miss you very much." Qin Yining was a little shy. "How are mother and second aunt? Is everyone at home okay?" They're fine. You'll know when you go home and see them after the court meeting," Qin Huayuan said with a smile. Qin Yining smiled and nodded. The originally heavy atmosphere was diluted by this small talk. Qin Yining was originally a little worried, but when he saw Qin Huayuan's natural expression, as if he had a card up his sleeve, and Pang Xiao's calm expression, he thought that since he was pregnant, Pang Xiao would not tell him some things. He must have already made arrangements outside. Qin Yining's originally worried heart was also half relieved. While they were talking, Pang Xiao had already instructed the Jingji guards who were blocking the other officials. "In the future, you don't have to do this kind of thing anymore. Everyone is a loyal subject of Your Majesty. It's just the heads of the departments. Do you want to compete with each other and make our relationship worse? Who ordered you to do this?" Pang Xiao's words were already accusing the other party of trying to sow discord between him and the other officials. How could the Jingji guards dare to directly say that this was Your Majesty's order? Immediately, he could only withdraw in embarrassment to avoid causing any more trouble. The officials who were closer to them vaguely understood something after hearing this conversation. However, they were only ordinary officials after all. They did not want to truly participate in the court battles, so they naturally did not want to speak too much outside. However, if they chatted with trusted relatives behind their backs, or said things like "I'm only telling you, don't tell anyone else," It was inevitable that today's matter would be spread. Pang Xiao's goal would be achieved sooner or later. This was the first time that Qin Yining had seen a court meeting. Because of Li Qitian's special instructions, Pang Xiao and Qin Yining could only temporarily bid farewell to Qin Huayuan and Qin Shuyuan and wait for your majesty to summon them. This was not the first time that Qin Yining had faced such an urgent situation, but it was the first time that she did not participate. Pang Xiao was worried about her health and did not allow her to participate in anything. Qin Yining also did not know what was going on. Although she trusted Pang Xiao, she was still very worried. Feeling that her palms were sweaty, Pang Xiao could not help but take her hands and wipe them on his imperial court robes. Don't be afraid. Nothing will happen. I will definitely protect you and our family. Qin Yining smiled bitterly. Of course I believe you. However, the current situation does not seem optimistic. You are not willing to tell me anything. I don't know anything, so of course I will be worried. Pang Xiao chuckled and said, all right, I already said that you will follow me in the future. Just focus on enjoying your life. There is no need to worry about these things. Isn't it good that I have taken care of everything? Of course, Qin Yining felt that this was very good. But when she thought of the present situation, it was impossible for her to not care at all. Just as Qin Yining frowned and did not speak, and Pang Xiao was worried and wanted to come forward to comfort her, the eunuch's voice suddenly came from the outside. Your Majesty has decreed that the Prince Zhongshiren and Wang Fei are summoned to court to discuss politic. This subject obeys. Pang Xiao helped Qin Yining straighten her clothes. He pulled her hand close to his lips and kissed it. He said, don't worry. Trust me. Qin Yining looked at him and nodded solemnly. Now that things had come to this point, she couldn't afford to be overcautious. No matter if they succeeded or failed, they were together. The two of them followed the eunuch all the way to the Hall of Political Harmony. Inside, the eunuch's voice was loud and sharp. It traveled far out of nowhere, and in the spacious hall, it shook people's eardrums. Not long after, the eunuch's voice came from inside the hall. Prince Zhongshiren and Wang Fei are summoned for an audience. Pang Xiao pulled Qin Yining's hand and patted it. Then he turned and walked up the stairs before her. His steps were steady as he walked into the hall. Qin Yining looked at the hall and took a deep breath. His gaze then landed on Pang Xiao's tall back. He smiled and slowly followed. The atmosphere in Zhenghe Hall was very tense. There was a faint murderous aura. The arrival of Pang Xiao and Qin Yining did not ease this atmosphere. Instead, it made the situation almost tense. After Qin Yining entered the hall, she lowered her eyes. She displayed all the etiquette she had learned from the etiquette instructor. She did not want anyone to find fault with her. Everyone had seen Pang Xiao many times, but this was the first time they had seen this Pang Xiao's enemy's daughter who had stolen by force and then married Pang Xiao's enemy's daughter. They had been very curious about Qin Huayuan's daughter. Now that they had seen her at such a close distance, many people couldn't help but think, as expected. If she hadn't been born with such a beautiful appearance, how could Prince Zhongshiren have forgotten about revenge? No matter what, Qin Yining had seen a lot of things. She just ignored the curious and malicious gazes of these people when they stared at her. She followed behind Pang Xiao in a dignified manner. Then, she approached Li Qitian and saluted him. Li Qitian said with a face full of smiles, "Beloved official, rise. Many thanks to your majesty." After Pang Xiao stood, she did not forget to turn around and help Qin Yining up. When the ministers saw this, they had more and more ideas about what to do. Li Qitian said with a face full of smiles, "This time, I had beloved official come with Wang Fei because of the sudden death of Tatan Ainari Khan. Beloved official, you also know that the current Yujin Khan of Tatan is not letting go of this matter. He insists that it was consort Prince Zhongshiren who killed him. Right now, he is sending cavalry to invade our Daeju border." Li Qitian looked at Qin Yining and asked gently, "Wang Fei should have an explanation for this matter?" Chapter 565. Qin Yining was expressionless, but she sneered in her heart. She took a step forward and saluted, "Reporting to your majesty, I." Before she could finish, she was interrupted by a high-pitched male voice full of anger. A middle-aged imperial censor angrily came forward and saluted, "Your Majesty, I have something to say." Li Chitian seemed to be very surprised and frowned unhappily. "Minister Jiyu, I am asking a question. Isn't it inappropriate for you to suddenly interrupt the Prince Zhongxian?" "Your Majesty, I know it is rude of me to do so, but I am a straightforward person." "It's just that this subject is a straightforward person." Seeing someone trying to bewitch His Majesty with flowery words and yet still trying to put on a virtuous face, this subject had no choice but to speak up. Imperial Censor Jiyu saluted and continued, "Your Majesty, please listen to me. If what I said is wrong and not true, I will accept Your Majesty's punishment." Li Chitian frowned as if he was caught in a dilemma. Seeing Imperial Censor Gu's sincerity, he could only smile and say, "Fine, you can speak first." "Yes." Imperial Censor Jiyu saluted excitedly and said with righteous indignation, "Your Majesty, as an Imperial Censor, I have to report the 10 major crimes of the Prince Zhongxian, indiscriminately killing the innocent and without mercy. The first crime is being arrogant and humiliating the old officials of Northern Ji. The second crime is being greedy and causing a misunderstanding between you and your subjects. The third crime is forcefully seizing a woman and ignoring Your Majesty's wishes. The fourth crime is leaving the capital without an imperial decree, intending to take the treasure for yourself. The fifth crime is being corrupt and disregarding the lives of the common people. The sixth crime is being greedy for power, being jealous of the talents of your colleagues. The seventh crime is forming a clique for personal gain, privately raising soldiers, and having evil intentions. The eighth crime is being unfilial and unfaithful, disrespecting your official mother, and being a son in vain. The ninth crime is disobeying the imperial decree, disrespecting Your Majesty, and defecting from another country. The most heinous crime is such an arrogant, rebellious, unfilial, disloyal, and unrighteous person. His crimes are too numerous to be recorded. I beseech Your Majesty to punish him severely." This subject agrees. Replying to Your Majesty, this subject also agrees. Prince Zhongxian is a vassal in vain. Your Majesty, please punish him severely and uphold the imperial court's discipline. As soon as Imperial Censor Gu's voice fell, more than 10 people immediately stood up and echoed loudly. With the crowd's excitement, it was possible to believe that Pang Xiao was a bandit who committed all sorts of crimes, such as burning, killing, and looting. Li Chitian sat at the head of the table. His eyebrows were slightly furrowed, as if he couldn't bear the blow but was forcing himself to remain calm. However, Pang Xiao, Qin Yining, Qin Huayuan and Qin Shuyuan didn't say a word. They didn't defend themselves at all. On the other hand, many of the nobles saw through the trick. They guessed that the greatest reason Your Majesty had arranged for today's meeting was that Pang Xiao's achievements were too great to overshadow Your Majesty. They were the same as Pang Xiao. They had followed Li Chitian to conquer the world in exchange for their current achievements. Pang Xiao was their benchmark. If he fell, they would probably be next. Thus, many of the nobles stood up and argued for Pang Xiao on the spot. These people also had officials they were close to, as well as colleagues in the same faction. They also took advantage of the situation and stood up to argue with the imperial censors. Seeing the nobles enter the fray, Li Chitian's subordinates also joined in. Seeing the other side gradually grow stronger, some of Pang Xiao's acquaintances stepped forward to intervene. For a moment, the scene was as chaotic as a vegetable market. When these officials quarreled, they were even more valiant than those in the marketplace. Quoting classics was even more offensive and persuasive than cursing. Li Chitian's brows furrowed tighter and tighter. He never would have thought that at this juncture, there would be so many people willing to speak up for Pang Xiao. It seemed that Pang Xiao's position in the hearts of the court officials and common people was no longer what he had thought it was. Li Chitian couldn't help but secretly rejoice that he had acted early. If he had given Pang Xiao more time to grow stronger, he would have taken root even more firmly. It would have been even more difficult to shake his foundation. The two sides argued in full swing. Both sides argued for what was right. This was the first time a debate of this scale had occurred in a court assembly since the founding of Daju. Qin Yining listened with his head bowed. He couldn't help but feel a bit nervous. Imperial Censor Ji had stepped forward today. He must have been acting on Li Qitian's orders. He believed that Li Qitian must have a backup plan. Although Pang Xiao was now a scholar of Wuying Palace, he was born a general and had accumulated great power in the military. Even among the common people, most of them knew of the reputation of war god Wang Yi. Thus, how could Li Qitian not arrange troops to deal with Pang Xiao? Currently, the Jingji Guard, the Divine Strategy Battalion, and the 3000 Battalion were stationed near the capital. The other force worth mentioning was the Tiger Army stationed in the fields on the outskirts of the capital. Qin Yining's heart suddenly skipped a beat. He couldn't help but size up the officials who had come to the Political Harmony Palace Hall out of the corner of his eye. During the court assembly, all officials of the 4th rank and above were allowed to participate. However, Ji Ziyu wasn't among these people. Qin Yining's pupils constricted, but his expression remained calm. He reminded himself not to panic and not to be caught red-handed. When he looked carefully, he discovered that Ji Ziyu really wasn't here today. Qin Yining's heart sank. If Ji Ziyu commanded the Tiger Army and worked with the Jingji Guard, the 3000 Battalion, and the Divine Strategy Battalion to encircle Pang Xiao, it was impossible for him to win with just the 50 or so Jinghu Wei in Pang Xiao's hands. As for the City Defense Army of the 5 Cities Warden's office, when he entered the city today, he discovered that these people were moving around more frequently than before. It seemed that Li Qitian had made thorough preparations today and planned to take down Pang Xiao in one fell swoop. As for those related to Pang Xiao, thinking of this, Qin Yining suddenly took a deep breath and forced herself to stop thinking about it. First of all, Pang Xiao wasn't a brainless and rash person. Since he dared to bring her to this feast at Hongmen today, he must have made sufficient preparations. He wasn't the kind of person who would get slapped on the left side of his face and get slapped on the right side. Moreover, he wasn't the kind of person who would disregard his family. Secondly, if Li Qitian wanted to succeed today, he would probably have to go through the public's opinion. As long as he grasped the situation well, there was still room for maneuvering. Pang Xiao was actually very worried about Qin Yining's condition. He was afraid that her panic would affect the baby. However, after observing her performance, he saw that her expression was normal and that she wasn't pretending to be calm. Instead, she was panicking for a moment before slowly coming to terms with the situation. He praised her in his heart. It was truly his fortune to have such a sensible wife. At this time, the debate between the two branches had reached a climax. Suddenly, many of the neutral officials noticed that Your Majesty's chief eunuch, Li Guanwen, had hurriedly walked over to Li Qitian's side with his head lowered and whispered a few words in his ear. Everyone couldn't help but be curious. Li Guanwen hadn't appeared in court today. What had happened when he suddenly appeared now? Li Qitian took advantage of the heated argument below to ask Li Guanwen in a low voice, "Why hasn't Jilan brought anyone here yet?" Li Guanwen's face was almost wrinkled into a bitter gourd. He had a constipated expression on his face as he stammered in a low voice, "Your Majesty," Prince Consort Ji said, "there are strange movements in the Tiger Army's barracks. He can't leave and has to stay in the barracks to oversee it." When Li Qitian heard this, he exerted force in his hand and almost broke the string of yellow jade beads he was playing with. He didn't show any signs of abnormality and reprimanded in a low voice, "What's going on? Didn't you see the Tiger Army's situation last time? Ji Ziyu's control of the Tiger Army doesn't lose to Pang Xiao's. Why would there be strange movements at such a crucial moment? Is there really something strange going on, or is he unwilling to come and help us?" Li Guanwen was so scared that he didn't dare to say a word. At this time, the more he said, the more mistakes he would make. Li Qitian glanced at the people in court and found that many people had begun to look in his direction. He hurriedly restrained his expression and put on his original expression of worrying about court matters. He gritted his teeth and said, "The current situation can turn chaotic at any time. What if it's really safe? Stay in the barracks. We need him to protect us. If he doesn't come, who is he staying in the barracks for?" Li Guanwen was scolded like a quail. He wanted to quickly retreat to the side and pretend to be invisible, but he couldn't not pass on Ji Ziyu's words. He could only say, "Prince Consort Ji said, if something happens, Prince Consort Ji must protect your majesty's safety even if he has to risk his life. My life. Li Chitian almost cursed. If he waited for Ji Ziyu to sacrifice his life, he might have already been killed by that traitor Pang Xiao. Li Chitian was very angry. The deployed imperial censor participated in the Pang Xiao, but there was a problem with the military generals. It should be known that Pang Xiao had a deep foundation among the people and had a very high status in the hearts of the people. If they couldn't attack him from both inside and outside, it was almost impossible to succeed this time. If they couldn't kill him with one blow this time and gave him a chance to breathe, things would become more and more difficult and dangerous in the future. Li Chitian fiercely ordered Li Guanwen in a low voice, "Go and urge him again for us." "Yes, Your Majesty." Li Guanwen wiped the sweat off his face, but he didn't dare to show it. He hurriedly retreated. At this time, the debate among the court officials became more and more chaotic. It was still the debate between those who wanted to impeach Pang Xiao and those who wanted to explain Pang Xiao's actions. The two sides even began to attack each other. Many people's hidden secrets were about to be revealed. Li Chitian originally only pretended to be worried, but he was actually very appreciative of these people's attacks on Pang Xiao. He felt that these people's words hit the bottom of his heart, making him feel very comfortable. But now, Li Chitian was really worried. If Pang Xiao really rebelled in a moment of desperation, with his martial arts, perhaps only Ji Ziyu in the entire capital could match him. Pang Xiao's attacks were fast and ruthless. If he finally shed all pretense of cordiality and got close to him, Li Chitian was afraid that he would die before Ji Ziyu came to save him. At this time, a young man wearing the uniform of a small eunuch walked up from the side. Li Chitian's pupils contracted. He had a bad premonition in his heart. This young man was not an ordinary eunuch. He was a secret agent that he raised. He specialized in spying and assassinating for him. Usually, they communicated in secret. But today, in an occasion like this court meeting, he changed into a eunuch's uniform and came out in the open. Li Chitian couldn't help but wonder if something had happened outside. Chapter 566. That young man whispered two things into Li Chitian's ear. "Your Majesty, this subject has been investigating outside and discovered that the Lu clan's situation has changed. The Lu clan's clan head has committed suicide by jumping into a well. The current clan head has been replaced by Lu Heng from the main branch. In addition, the Lu clan's former clan head has suddenly stopped transporting the provisions to the border. This subject thought that it must be the new clan head, Lu Heng's orders. Because this happened so suddenly, this subject felt that this matter was very serious, so I hurriedly came to report to Your Majesty." At this time, Li Chitian felt as if he had been struck by lightning. Wasn't Lu Heng dead? Previously, his spies had gone to the border to investigate and discovered that Qin Yining had returned with Pang Xiao. After several investigations, they found out that Lu Heng had died of a serious illness when he was in Taitan. At that time, Li Chitian had thought that the Lu clan's troublemaker was finally dead. The new clan head was a sensible person who was obedient and easy to manipulate. But who would have thought that a person who was supposed to be dead would suddenly appear, and the clan head of the Lu clan, whom he thought was very useful, would suddenly jump into a well and commit suicide? If one were to say that Pang Xiao's deliberate design and Lu Heng's wanton assassination, Li Chitian would not believe it even if he was beaten to death. The Lu clan's financial resources, material resources, and connections were not something he could compare to. Even though he was now the emperor, he could be considered to be extremely wealthy. However, the wealth and power that he truly grasped was not much. Li Chitian had been in power for less than 5 years, but the amount of money in the national treasury was getting smaller and smaller, and he was unable to make ends meet. There were so many troublesome matters in the world. Today, there was a disaster here, tomorrow, there would be bandits there. One matter after another would have to be dealt with by his hands. Those idiots below him only knew how to open their big mouths and ask him for money. The Lu family had a deep foundation. Many times, in order to achieve his goals, Li Chitian even had to flatter the Lu family. This time, when the Taitan declared war, Diegu really did not have the money to fight back. Thus, The task of transporting the army provisions was undertaken by Second Master Lu, who had just become the head of the household. But now, this path had been cut off by that guy, Lu Heng. The two factions in the imperial court each expressed their own opinion. For a moment, they were evenly matched, but no one could tell what was going on. Ji Zheyu also said that the Tiger Army was acting strangely and could not enter the palace to help. Now, the Lu clan was causing trouble for him. Li Qitian really felt that he was in a dilemma. Should the current situation be allowed to continue to develop? The change in the head of the Lu family had caused the delivery of the rations to be stopped halfway. This was actually just a matter of adding firewood, which did not affect the current situation at all. If Ji Zheyu could quickly deal with the unrest in the Tiger Army and rush over in time, he should have a chance to take down Pang Xiao in one fell swoop. As for Lu Heng, he did not believe that the survival of these aristocratic families would not consider the imperial power. He could persuade them emotionally and logically and offer them benefits. As the saying goes, there are no common enemies, only common interests. As long as his interests were on the same line as the Lu family's, he believed that he could pull Lu Heng over to his side. Li Qitian frowned and pondered for a moment. Then, he felt relieved. At this time, the imperial censors were arguing so loudly that spittle flew everywhere. They were on the verge of fighting. Li Qitian was annoyed by the noise. Moreover, it would not be good for his reputation if word of this situation spread out. He raised his hand and gestured, "Everyone, shut up." In the end, Li Qitian's voice was not louder than these people. They were still arguing. When Pang Xiao saw Li Qitian's appearance, he stood up and reprimanded in a deep voice, "Everyone, shut up. Did you not hear your Majesty's order?" Imperial Censor Jiyu, everyone, a person who had just been accused of not respecting his superiors, was able to pay attention to your Majesty's every move. When your Majesty ordered him to shut up, he was able to make others listen to your Majesty's orders. And the people who accused Pang Xiao just now did not care about your Majesty's intentions at all. This kind of contrast was too strong and too embarrassing. Some people who supported Pang Xiao stood up and cupped their hands. Your Majesty has also seen it. Prince Zhongshiren's temperament is straightforward. Perhaps he has been in the military for a long time and his behavior is a bit uncouth. However, he is definitely not someone who disobeys his superiors. Those accusations just now were simply fabricated. Since Imperial Censor Jiyu is so loyal to the Emperor, why did Prince Zhongshiren have to remind him to shut up? Exactly. Your Majesty, this subject believes that Prince Zhongshiren's military exploits are splendid. Back then, he made great contributions in conquering Daeju. Prince Zhongshiren is also your Majesty's sworn brother. With such a halo around him, it is inevitable that there will be people who will be jealous and frame him. Those false accusations have no basis at all. Without evidence, how can the officials and the common people be convinced? If you can't convince the people and act rashly against Prince Zhongshiren, I'm afraid there will only be rumors outside that your Majesty is afraid of the meritorious officials. Your Majesty is a wise ruler. Naturally, he won't do such a thing. However, there are many foolish people among the common people. If they say so, won't your Majesty be unable to defend himself? This subject is thinking for your Majesty. This matter must be considered at length. These people spilled beans at an extremely fast speed, and every word they said was reasonable. Li Qitian inwardly mocked them. Was this the loyalty of these people to the Emperor and their country? Yet at this critical moment, these people's hearts were all on the side of an outsider. Li Qitian's heart was now much more at ease. He wanted to solve all the problems one by one. It was fine as long as he could take down Pang Xiao today. Seeing that Li Qitian was deep in thought and not speaking, the officials began to quarrel again. Li Qitian's head hurt from the noise. Just as he was about to speak, he saw that the young man who had disguised himself as a young eunuch had returned. This time, his footsteps were even more hurried than before. When he arrived in front of him, he lowered his voice and said, "Your Majesty, we just received news that Prince Consort Ji has been placed under house arrest in the barracks by several commanders of the Tiger Army." Li Qitian's eyes suddenly widened. Because the string of beads in his hand had already fallen, He could only clench his fists tightly. He didn't even care that his fingernails had left a few scratches on his palms. Li Chitian had been warning himself to not panic and to remain calm. He must remain calm. He must not let others see that there was a problem here. However, Ji Zheyu had been placed under house arrest by the commanders of the Tiger Army. He couldn't come to fight against Pang Xiao. If today's matter angered Pang Xiao, he would be barbaric and start a massacre. He was afraid that his bodyguards wouldn't be able to last more than 10 rounds against Pang Xiao. What if Pang Xiao had the idea of killing the emperor in a fit of anger? Li Chitian felt that if he forced Pang Xiao into a corner, with his temperament, he might really risk it all. Li Chitian's heart was still burning with anxiety and frustration. Where did Ji Zheyu go wrong? The Lu family was causing trouble for him again. He suppressed his anger and invited Pang Xiao into the trap because he wanted to get rid of all future troubles. But now, in front of all the civil and military officials, was he really going to make a fool of himself? At this time, the officials below began to argue again. Li Chitian's head buzzed as he listened. He was on the verge of exploding. At this time, Pang Xiao stood up again and coldly reprimanded those who were arguing. Enough, this is the Political Harmony Palace, Your Majesty's court meeting. It's fine if you all have your own opinions, but why is there no end to it? This king followed Your Majesty on the battlefield in the past and went through fire and water together. That was a relationship where you could trust each other's backs. This king's wife went missing. As his sworn brother, Your Majesty kept persuading this king to return to the capital. This king refused. That's also a relationship between me and my sworn brother. How is it that I'm plotting a rebellion when it comes to you? Could it be that with your false accusations and instigation, you think that the emperor will convict this prince of my crimes? You said this king killed the innocent. What a joke. This king asks you, which war doesn't kill people? Is the brain of the person who said this filled with shit and urine? You said this king humiliated the old officials of Northern Ji? Ask the old officials of Northern Ji here, when did this king humiliate them? You said this king embezzled money and provisions. You're even more arrogant. When I first took over Northern Ji's treasury, to put it bluntly, the incapable ruler of Northern Ji could starve all the rats in the treasury to suicide. You said I embezzled the heir. You said I snatched the daughter of an official. My marriage to the Qin clan was bestowed by Your Majesty. How is that snatching? I left the capital to search for treasures because I was ordered to provide disaster relief. On the way, I searched for treasures for Your Majesty. You said I embezzled money from the disaster? That's the biggest joke in the world. My wife's dowry and my money have been donated. Otherwise, the people of the old Dian would have rebelled out of hunger. How could I allow a bunch of vermin like you to criticize me in the capital? You said I was jealous of my colleagues. At this point, Pang Xiao suddenly burst into laughter. He pointed at the officials and said domineeringly, to be honest, all of you are here to compete with this king. This king wants all of you to come at him together. What do you have that is worthy of this king's jealousy? This king has private soldiers. Let me ask you. As a prince, you have 50 soldiers. Is that overstepping the limit? Pang Xiao stepped in front of Imperial Censor Ji Yu. Imperial Censor Ji Yu is a learned man. Tell me, as a prince personally appointed by Your Majesty, is it overstepping the limit to have 50 soldiers? Imperial Censor Ji Yu took 2 steps back after hearing Pang Xiao's words. He was so scared that his whole body was trembling. Pang Xiao finally said, as for being unfilial to my official mother, there is one thing I have to say now. Pang Xiao turned to Li Chitian and saluted. Your Majesty took pity on my life and helped me find my surviving official mother. I am grateful. But after contact and investigation, I found that the official mother Your Majesty found was actually a fake. Li Chitian's eyebrows twitched. Pang Xiao said, I know Your Majesty's good intentions. I didn't want to make things difficult for Your Majesty, so I sent the fake Madam Pang out. In fact, I plan to keep this matter to myself for the rest of my life. I will never say it out loud. There is such a thing. That vicious woman deceived me for glory and wealth. Li Chitian was unable to restrain his anger and stood up. Pang Xiao said, "Your Majesty, don't be angry. It is not your fault. That woman was too greedy. She wanted to deceive your Majesty because she knew something about the past. That is the crime of deceiving your Majesty. It is unforgivable." Li Chitian was furious. He immediately said, "Arrest that woman and behead her tomorrow afternoon." Chapter 567. The civil and military officials in the court were not fools. If they still couldn't see through your Majesty's intentions, then they would be wasting their time as court officials. Hearing your Majesty say this, many people began to chime in. The imperial censors who followed Imperial Censor Jiyu in impeaching Pang Xiao all had ashen faces. They felt that their lives were about to be forfeited today. As expected, Li Chitian said in a deep voice, "As subjects, not only did you not share my burdens and solve my problems, it's fine if I don't blame you for your incompetence, but you actually dared to frame a loyal subject in front of me. If I were to believe your slanderous words today, wouldn't I become an incapable ruler who framed his subjects? What are you trying to do to me? These people should all be severely punished." Li Chitian's anger was completely released at this moment. This was because the Li Chitian in his impression had never been this angry before. How could an ordinary person withstand the majesty of an emperor? Everyone was afraid that they would be implicated. Even the officials who had maintained a neutral stance on this matter were shocked by your Majesty's anger. Not to mention Imperial Censor Jiyu and the others who were trembling on the ground. Seeing that Li Chitian intended to push the blame onto others and remove himself from the blame, Pang Xiao immediately bowed and said, "Your Majesty, please calm down." The Imperial Censor's accusations were like this. They found a problem and wanted to impeach, but that was because they were doing their duty. Today, they impeached Yu Chen because someone had caused this misunderstanding behind their backs. They did their job diligently. Although they were fooled, they didn't do anything wrong. "Your Majesty, please calm down." Many of the officials were very surprised. They originally thought that with Pang Xiao's domineering personality, he wouldn't let go of an opportunity to take revenge. Who would have thought that the murderous Wang Yi would have a soft heart and speak on behalf of the people who had just impeached him? However, those who understood the situation clearly knew that Pang Xiao was not being benevolent and generous. It was clear that he wanted to let those imperial censors feel the difference in the way Li Chitian treated them. If it wasn't for your Majesty's instructions, the imperial censors would probably never impeach Pang Xiao for the rest of their lives. They listened to your Majesty's orders, but in the end, they were ordered by your Majesty to be severely punished, and the one who pleaded for them was the one who was impeached by them. Such a contrast could be seen clearly by outsiders, but the people involved must be even more clear about it. Li Chitian also had the same feeling in his heart. He secretly hated Pang Xiao for pretending to be a good person. But he could only suffer in silence. None of his deployments worked. Now, he was afraid that Pang Xiao would explode on the spot and cause an uncontrollable situation. So, regardless of whether he could tolerate it or not, he could only tolerate it. Li Chitian muttered to himself and sighed, "Forget it. We'll do as Prince Zhongshuren says." However, all of you must remember that in the future, you are not allowed to sow discord between me and the other officials for no reason. Our Daeju dynasty has just been established for 4 years. What we need is for all of you to work together for the welfare of the people, not for internal strife. We must learn from the lesson of BG. If it wasn't for the fact that the officials of BG were not united and the corruption and extravagance were serious, the people wouldn't have been so angry in the end. We should also learn from the lessons of the Northern Ji Kingdom. When the officials heard this, they all bowed. "Your Majesty is wise." Li Chitian saw that the situation had stabilized and could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Fortunately, Pang Xiao was not angered to the point where he could not control himself. Once he went berserk, the consequences would be even more difficult to control. However, when Li Chitian thought of Ji Zheyu, who was under house arrest in the Tiger Army's barracks, he felt a wave of anger and suspicion. Ji Zheyu was not an incompetent person. Otherwise, he would not have been able to dominate the north and make the Taytan tremble when they heard Ji Zheyu's name. A few days ago, he had specially asked Li Guanwen to probe Ji Zheyu. At that time, Ji Zheyu had a good grasp of the Tiger Army's situation. Why did he fail at such a crucial moment? Now, if anyone told Li Qitian that Ji Zheyu's situation was not intentional, he would not believe it. Li Qitian's thoughts flashed through his mind. He had already made up his mind to severely punish Ji Zheyu. Ji Zheyu ruined his plans and made him lose face. How could he let him go? Li Qitian remembered that he had asked Qin Yining a question just now. This was the best time to change the topic, so he said, "Prince Zhengxian, continue to answer my question just now." Qin Yining saw the entire process. Just a few people who came to Li Qitian to answer Li Qitian's questions completely changed his attitude. She understood that Pang Xiao must have made some preparations behind the scenes. Now that Li Qitian had changed the topic, she knew that the crisis had been resolved. Qin Yining was overjoyed and sighed with emotion at Pang Xiao's power. However, her expression was calm as she bowed and said, "Your Majesty, I was not the one who killed Anari Khan that day. The one who really killed Anari Khan is the current Wu Tajin Khan." Qin Yining concealed the existence of Mu Jinghu and did not mention Lu Heng. He only gave a general description of the situation that day. Later, "I only knocked the Khan of Anari unconscious. I didn't expect that after Wu Tajin Khan brought his trusted aides, he would kill his first wife. In the end, he even used Anari Khan's death to arouse the sympathy of the people. When I was hiding in Taitan, the Taitan people were full of praise for Wu Tajin Khan's vow to avenge Anari. As long as he said that he wanted to avenge Anari Khan, even a 10-year-old child would want to fight on the battlefield. Their people are hot-blooded and valiant, which is different from our Da-Ju. Wu Tajin Khan very cleverly controlled their emotions and thoughts. Qin Yining's voice drifted over and explained the situation clearly. The civil and military officials in the court fell into deep thought. It seems that we have underestimated Wu Tajin Khan's shamelessness. Li Qitian gritted his teeth and said, "This Wu Tajin Khan helped Anari ascend to the position of Queen Regent, and then slowly supported her to become Khan. I'm afraid that he did it so that he could legitimately obtain the position of Khan from her, the rightful heir of the royal family, and gain the recognition of the people. His scheming is deep and shameless, it's simply outrageous." When the officials heard this, they all agreed and condemned Wu Tajin Khan's shamelessness. After a while, someone stood up and said, "It seems that Prince Zhengxian's wife was kidnapped to Taitan on the way back from the disaster relief. Even if Taitan wants to go to war now, it's not because of Prince Zhengxian's wife. The princess is really innocent in this matter." Exactly. As a woman, the princess was able to maintain her strength of character in Taitan and did not do anything to harm Da-Ju. She was also able to maintain her chastity until we rescued her. Her temperament and willpower are worthy of being studied by the women of Da-Ju. When someone said this, everyone saw that Li Qitian had no intention of refuting, so they all agreed. Qin Yining lowered his eyes and did not make a sound. Pang Xiao, Qin Huayuan, and Qin Shuyuan also did not make a sound. They looked as if they were completely at Your Majesty's command. Li Qitian smiled and nodded repeatedly, but in his heart, he was so angry that he almost spat out a mouthful of old blood. What did these people mean? What? His plan did not succeed and he did not capture Pang Xiao, but why did they want him to reward his wife? A woman was kidnapped to Taitan. Who knew if she was still chaste or not? These people praised her chastity, but he had no way to refute at this juncture. These people were definitely ordered by Pang Xiao. Li Qitian gritted his teeth so hard that they almost broke. But he could only swallow this loss. Everyone is right. Prince Zhengxian's consort is indeed a heroine. Li Qitian smiled and said, "The Qin clan listens to the title. This subject's wife is here." Qin Yining bowed gracefully. Prince Zhengxian's consort is from the Qin clan. She is intelligent, virtuous, and virtuous. She can be called the model of a woman. Today, she is specially conferred the title of a superior first-rank noble lady. Chapter 568. Qin Yining said in surprise, "These things, the Tiger Army putting Prince Consort Ji under house arrest, and the Lu family changing hands and cutting off the food supplies, were these all your arrangements? Of course not. Pang Xiao smiled and said, these are actually the spontaneous actions of Jilan and Lu Heng. I just used a little trick to make these things explode in one day. This matter is just calm on the surface now, but your Majesty will definitely investigate thoroughly after the court. Even if I didn't do anything, he will think of a way to accuse me of several crimes. If I really did control these things, won't your Majesty go crazy? Thinking of Li Qitian's angry look just now, Qin Yining couldn't help but laugh again. He tapped Pang Xiao's shoulder and said, you're too bad. With all these things put together, it's easy to guess that someone did it. But you didn't do anything, so he can't accuse you of any crimes. Isn't this driving him to death? Pang Xiao shrugged helplessly and spread out his hands, with a look that said, what can I do? I'm also very helpless. Qin Yining laughed again. Seeing that she didn't have any grudges and that today's matter didn't affect her health, Pang Xiao was completely relieved. Qin Yining leaned on Pang Xiao's shoulder, thought for a while, and said, but after today's matter, you and your Majesty are only separated by a thin layer of paper. Although your Majesty has no choice but to endure it, once he finds the right time in the future, he will definitely make things difficult for you. When the time comes, you have to think about how to deal with it. Pang Xiao couldn't help but laugh when he saw her frown and nagging with concern. He rubbed his forehead against hers and said, I know. I'll take care of it properly. Don't worry. The most important thing for you now is to take care of your body. You don't have to think about anything else. Qin Yining stroked his flat stomach and nodded with a smile. I got it. Qin Yining lifted the curtain and looked outside. He asked, where are we going now? I think father-in-law and uncle have already gone home. Let's go over now. You haven't seen mother-in-law for a long time. Qin Yining's eyes lit up. She smiled and nodded obediently. Okay. After thinking for a while, she asked, how are grandpa, grandma, and mother now? When will they be back? Pang Xiao smiled and said, don't worry, I've already made the proper arrangements. When the situation here stabilizes, it will be about time for them to visit their relatives. Qin Yining thought for a moment and couldn't help but laugh even more heartily. As long as she thought of Li Qitian's twisted face in the morning court meeting, she felt exceptionally happy. Pang Xiao's plan this time gave Qin Yining a big surprise. At first, she didn't ask about this matter because of her feelings and trust in him. She trusted him and gave him full authority. Now, it seemed that Pang Xiao really had the ability for her to rely on. Even if she didn't intervene, he could handle things properly one by one. He could even handle things more brilliantly than when she was involved. Qin Yining leaned on Pang Xiao's shoulder with peace of mind and discussed what to do after they went back. At the same time, in the imperial study, Li Qitian sat at the head of the table with a gloomy face. He hadn't said a word for a long time. The palace servants serving in the imperial study were all silent. They hated that they couldn't become invisible from now on. They didn't want your Majesty to vent his anger on them. Li Guanwen lowered his eyes and stood far away by the ancient shelf made of black paulownia wood. He prayed thousands of times in his heart that your Majesty wouldn't notice him. At this time, Li Qitian seemed to have recovered from his thoughts. He frowned and took a sip of tea. The tea in his mouth was a bit cold. He was furious. He raised his hand and smashed the teacup, shouting, "Who did this? What's the use of raising dogs like you? At this critical moment, you don't even know how to share my worries. You only make trouble for me. Can't you even make tea?" As soon as he heard Li Qitian's words, Li Guanwen knew that your Majesty was still angry at Prince Consort Ji and was venting his anger on others. Normally, Li Qitian's tea was made by palace servants who were responsible for making tea. They would make sure that the temperature and thickness of the tea was suitable for drinking. But today, Li Qitian was furious. Who would dare to make tea in front of him for no reason? Wouldn't that be courting death? Because of this, Li Qitian drank the herbal tea. The palace maid who made the tea knelt down with a pale face. She didn't care about the broken porcelain on the floor and cut her knees and hands. She repeatedly kowtowed and said with a trembling voice, "Your Majesty, please calm down. This servant knows her mistake." As soon as Li Chitian heard the voice that belonged to a young girl, he became even angrier. He thought of the Qin Yining in the main hall from beginning to end. Her attitude was calm and leisurely. Now that he thought about it, for a woman to be so calm, wasn't it because she had a card up her sleeve? This was enough to prove that Pang Xiao had secretly arranged everything. These people were colluding with each other. Wasn't it just to bully him? The anger in Li Chitian's heart was like oil that had been spilled. It burned even more fiercely. He pointed at the palace maid who made the tea and said, "Drag this lowly servant out and flog her 100 times. Yes. The imperial bodyguards outside the hall immediately responded and entered. They dragged the palace maid who was so scared that she couldn't speak, one on the left and one on the right. When she was dragged out of the hall, the palace maid finally found her voice. Her mournful screams resounded through the sky. "Your Majesty, please spare my life. Your Majesty harassed this servant. This servant doesn't want to die. This servant doesn't want to die. Your Majesty." That mournful screams made people's hair stand on end. Seeing that Li Chitian's brows were furrowed even tighter, Li Guanwen hurriedly followed him out. He gestured to the imperial bodyguards and said in a low voice, "Why aren't you sealing her mouth? Wait until your Majesty gets angry. Otherwise, we'll all lose our heads." "Yes." The imperial bodyguards hurriedly took out a handkerchief from their sleeves, crumpled it into a ball, and stuffed it into the palace maid's mouth. They pulled her far away to a corner and called for 2 little eunuchs who were in charge of administering punishment. She was beaten 100 times without mercy. After 20 to 30 beatings, her bones and tendons were broken. That palace maid was already vomiting blood, her eyes were bulging, and she was no longer breathing. After the 100 beatings, she was already sitting upright. The eunuchs covered their mouths and noses, resisting the urge to vomit, and went to fetch water to clean the floor. The unlucky palace maid was directly wrapped in a mat and thrown out. Regardless of what the bystanders thought, Li Chitian listened to the sound of the wooden planks, and the anger in his heart subsided a little. Smelling the faint smell of blood, he even felt his state of mind calm down a lot. He was able to calm down and think about what to do next. Seeing Li Chitian narrowing his eyes and pondering, Li Guanwen was so scared that he almost trembled into a ball. To be able to find peace in the midst of brutality and blood, this kind of person's heart was probably ruthless to a certain extent. In your Majesty's eyes, killing a palace maid was probably as insignificant as stepping on an ant. After a while, Li Chitian, who was deep in thought, finally opened his mouth. "Li Guanwen. This servant is here." Li Guanwen immediately stepped forward and bowed, suppressing the panic and fear in his heart. "What orders does your Majesty have?" "Immediately take Zhen's decree and go to the Tiger Army. Order Ji Zayu and the generals who put him under house arrest to enter the palace and say Zhen's words. If they have any dissatisfaction, they can personally state it in front of Zhen. Private conflicts are not what Zhen wants to see." Li Guanwen heard this and let out a sigh of relief. But when he thought of the Tiger Army's camp that was probably in chaos, he felt his scalp go numb. If he went, he didn't know if he would lose his little life. Li Guanwen braced himself and bowed solemnly. "Yes, this servant will do it immediately." Then, he went out to do as he was told without fear of death. Li Chitian rubbed his chin, pondering the intentions of those uncouth men in the Tiger Army. If this was really arranged by Pang Xiao, then he was afraid that what would happen next would be a mutiny. Li Chitian calmly issued several decrees, arranging for the Jingji Guard and the Warden's Office of the 5 cities to be on standby in the city today to be prepared. The people who received the decrees were at a loss for a moment. They had no idea what Your Majesty wanted them to be prepared for when he said to be prepared. Or rather, they had no idea what Your Majesty wanted them to do. In reality, if they could, they really wished that they weren't officials in the capital right now and were far away from this place of trouble. The people below were terrified. Li Chitian also tensed himself up like a bowstring. His hesitation and uneasiness continued until Ji Zayu and the 6 Tiger Army generals of different ranks came to the palace hall together. When Li Guanwen saw Li Chitian, he felt as if he had survived a disaster. In reality, when he went to the Tiger Army's camp, Li Guanwen was already prepared to die. If things went wrong, his little life would be embroiled in the disputes in the army. If those generals really rebelled, killing him would be as easy as killing an ant. But he actually came back alive. Your Majesty. Li Guanwen suppressed his excitement and bowed. Li Qitian nodded from his seat at the head of the table. Then, he shifted his gaze to the two groups of people in front of him. Ji Ziyu stood on one side with a cold expression. The 6 Tiger Army generals and lieutenants who originally followed Pang Xiao stood on the other side. Both sides obviously didn't like each other. They were like angry fighting cocks. Even though they were right in front of Li Qitian in the imperial study, they still seemed to want to bite each other in order to feel at ease. Li Qitian said in a deep voice, "You actually dare to put the commander-in-chief under house arrest? Do you know your crime?" The 6 people immediately knelt on one knee and saluted with cupped fists. "Your Majesty, please calm down. We know our crime. However, we also have our reasons." Li Qitian heard the buzzing of these rough men's voices in the imperial study. It was so loud that his head hurt. He pointed at the youngest general with a sullen face. "You speak." "Yes." Chapter 569. Theory. Ji Ziyu said coldly, "You're disobeying military orders. How dare you argue in front of your Majesty? Although you're the temporary commander-in-chief of the Tiger Army, you don't understand the internal affairs of the Tiger Army. It's easy to cause the army's morale to drop. Since we've been trusted by your Majesty and entrusted with important tasks, we should be loyal to your Majesty. You're just a new official who wants to monopolize power. Now you have the nerve to talk about military orders. That's right, you just want to monopolize power. You don't care about the original structure of the Tiger Army and want to act recklessly. I don't know where you put the country's interests and your Majesty's trust." The 6 of them opened their mouths and started a crusade against Ji Ziyu. Ji Ziyu wasn't the kind of person who was good with words. At this time, he might not be able to win an argument against 6 people, or he might be disdainful to argue with these people. He just stood there with a cold face and his hands behind his back. However, his face was getting darker and darker. It was obvious that he was on the verge of losing his patience. Li Qitian quietly let them argue. He took the opportunity to observe their expressions to determine if they were really arguing or if they had made an agreement. To be honest, although he trusted Ji Ziyu more, he didn't completely trust him. He was more or less suspicious and guarded against him. At the most critical time, he handed the task of taking down Pang Xiao to Ji Ziyu. However, Ji Ziyu created such a mess at the last minute and ruined his plans. How could Li Qitian not be suspicious? However, Li Qitian observed carefully for a long time and couldn't find any flaws. Ji Ziyu and the 6 uncouth men had indeed reached the point where they hated each other so much that they wanted to kill each other. Li Qitian felt that if he wasn't in charge now, they might have drawn their swords on the spot. Since Ji Ziyu wasn't colluding with the Tiger Army, there were 2 possibilities. Either the Tiger Army was instructed by Pang Xiao and chose to cause trouble at this time. Either Ji Ziyu's bad temper had caused public anger in the Tiger Army, and these people did not listen to him. Their anger had accumulated to a certain extent and exploded when Pang Xiao returned. While Li Qitian was deep in thought, the atmosphere between Ji Ziyu and the 6 men had become so tense that they were about to start fighting. Li Qitian didn't want to make a big deal out of it. He didn't want to see them make trouble under his watch, so he said, "Everyone, shut up." Li Qitian's voice was neither loud nor soft, but it was an imperial edict. Everyone obeyed the order and kept quiet. They also realized that they had gone overboard in arguing in the imperial study and lowered their heads. Li Qitian sneered and said, "How dare you? You dare to be so arrogant in my imperial study? Don't tell me you want to rebel. We know our mistake. Your Majesty, please forgive us." The 7 men knelt down and bowed. Li Qitian reprimanded, "No matter what Jilan's orders are, he is the commander-in-chief that I have personally chosen. Even if I trust his ability to lead troops, I intend to hand over all matters in the Tiger Army to him. You can only listen to military orders. Do you understand?" The The 6 men were speechless for a moment. After a while, they replied, yes. Li Chitian looked at the 6 men and thought for a while. He was sure that they were all capable subordinates by Pang Xiao's side. He was overjoyed. It was such a good opportunity. If he could seize the right time to take them all down, wouldn't Pang Xiao lose 6 of his subordinates in the army all of a sudden? Thinking of this, Li Chitian was so excited in his letter that he almost announced the order to kill the 6 men. But after thinking about it, although the 6 of them weren't as famous as Pang Xiao and Ji Zhayu, they were still generals who had served the imperial court for many years. If he killed them all at once and insisted that they were plotting a rebellion by imprisoning the commander-in-chief, it was possible. However, this kind of statement would easily arouse suspicion from the outside world. Having just experienced Pang Xiao's incident, Li Chitian couldn't bear the gossip of the outside world. Thinking of this, Li Chitian said, "You imprisoned the commander-in-chief and disobeyed the imperial edict. Your crimes are punishable by death." The 6 men's faces immediately turned pale. However, none of them panicked. They all lowered their heads and waited for Li Chitian's next order. Li Chitian saw that these men were so calm and felt a bit of panic in his heart. Could it be that they really did this because they listened to Pang Xiao's orders? Did they have something to rely on and believe that he wouldn't kill them? Li Chitian's hands tightly gripped the armrests of his chair. He really wanted to kill these people to vent his anger. However, when he remembered that his reputation was the most important, he finally forced himself to restrain himself. However, seeing that you have been loyal to the country for many years and have shed blood and tears on the battlefield, we won't bicker with you. However, you can avoid the death penalty, but you can't escape punishment. Guards. Yes. Suddenly, 20 to 30 imperial bodyguards rushed in from outside. Each of them looked nervous and ready for battle. Li Chitian raised his voice and said, "Strip these 6 men of their official robes and flog them 20 times each. After that, send them back to the mansion and strip them of all their official positions. They will never be employed again. As you command." The imperial bodyguards immediately stepped forward. The 6 men didn't say a word as they were stripped of their official robes. They were dragged outside and given a beating. After that, the eunuchs were arranged to send them back. When the 6 men were being flogged, Li Chitian didn't let Ji Zhayu get up. He just stared at him silently. Ji Zhayu's face was as indifferent as usual. After listening to the sound of the execution, he expressionlessly raised his eyes and met Li Chitian's gaze. Li Chitian met those emotionless eyes and said in a low voice, "Ji Lan, you have disappointed us." Ji Zhayu lowered his head and pursed his bright red lips. His long eyelashes cast 2 shadows on his face. Li Chitian continued, "You have been a commander of the Dragon Legion for many years. We don't believe that you have the ability to let things develop to this state." After saying this, Li Chitian stood up and walked to Ji Zhayu step by step. He lowered his head and looked at Ji Zhayu's upright posture as he knelt. The anger that he had suppressed exploded once again. Li Chitian kicked Ji Zhayu's shoulder. Ji Zhayu didn't dodge and was kicked to the ground. "Ji Lan, you dare say that you didn't do this on purpose? You know how important today's matter is to the imperial court. It was clearly the best opportunity to get rid of the hidden danger in one fell swoop. But because of your inaction, all of our arrangements were in vain. You have made us the laughingstock of the people in the imperial court." Ji Zhayu got up and knelt again. His voice was as cold as usual, and his emotions didn't fluctuate. "This subject did this for your majesty." When Li Chitian heard this, his anger once again soared to a new height. Chapter 570. Ji Zhayu said calmly, "Your Majesty's statement." "You. What kind of attitude is that?" Li Chitian flew into a rage and kicked Ji Zhayu again. Ji Zhayu was kicked so hard that he fell to the ground again. His handsome face was still expressionless. "During this period of time, we have treated you as if we were of the same mind. We have promoted you and entrusted you with important tasks. We have treated you well. But what about you? Is this how you repay our trust?" Just like that, he allowed Li Chitian to vent his emotions. He scolded and kicked Li Chitian several times. Finally, Li Chitian was so tired that he put his hands on his hips and panted heavily. Ji Zheyu knelt properly and said, "Your Majesty, the reason this subject is doing this is indeed for your Majesty's sake." Li Chitian pointed at Ji Zheyu and nodded angrily. "Fine, then tell us why you are doing this. If what you say is reasonable, then we will forget about this matter. If you argue, do you really think we can only have you?" Ji Zheyu lowered his head and said, "This subject does not think that way. Daju is full of talented people. Your Majesty has the support of the people. How can you only have this subject? This subject is doing this for two reasons. First, the current situation in the imperial court is not suitable to take down Pang Zhishi. Tayton is eyeing us covetously. External threats are coming, so how can we deal with internal problems? First, we should work together to resist external threats. Once everything is stable, we can close our doors and resolve our internal problems. Second, although the Tiger Army is under my command, those people were once Pang Zhishi's men. If there is a need to take action one day, they will always be a hidden danger. Why don't we take this opportunity to stabilize Pang Zhishi and give your Majesty a legitimate reason to replace Pang Zhishi's men in important positions? Isn't this killing two birds with one stone?" Ji Zheyu was usually not good with words. He rarely spoke so much in one breath. It was rare for him to speak, so Li Chitian listened very carefully. After kicking Ji Zheyu so many times without him making a sound, Li Chitian's anger had already subsided a lot. Now that he listened to Ji Zheyu's analysis of the reason, Li Chitian carefully pondered over it and couldn't help but feel a little bit of agreement. Today's failure in the imperial court had made Li Chitian realize that he had indeed acted too hastily this time. Not only did he fail to take down Pang Xiao in one fell swoop, but he had also caused an extremely negative impact on his reputation outside. He had also acted rashly and alerted the enemy, which had intensified the conflict between the two of them. Now, he was only left with a thin layer of skin to maintain his dignity. If Pang Xiao were to lead the troops to rebel now, he would be able to find an excuse. Pang Xiao's reputation had always been very high among the people, and his appeal in the military was even more unmatched. Tayton was now doing his best to invade the south, and had already expressed his desire to invade the south. If at this time, Pang Xiao was forced to rebel against Daju and join forces with Yujin Khan to deal with Daju, when Li Chitian thought of this, he was already sweating profusely. He couldn't help but somewhat agree with Ji Zheyu's actions. At least now, the generals in the Tiger Army who were wholeheartedly loyal to Pang Xiao had already successfully taken down 6 people. He could replace these 6 people with his own trusted subordinates. When the time came, the Tiger Army would completely break away from Pang Xiao's control. At least if he wanted to rebel, he would definitely choose the Tiger Army that he had led for many years. He definitely wouldn't be able to order the Dragon Army in the north. Ji Zheyu was originally the god of war that was revered by tens of thousands of people in the Dragon Army. Now that he had firm control over the Tiger Army, the military power of the world was already in the hands of his own people. When he took down Pang Xiao in the future, if Ji Zheyu had any thoughts of betrayal, it would be easy to deal with him with only one person. It was better than constantly worrying that Pang Xiao and Ji Zheyu would join forces to rebel against him. Thinking of this, Li Chitian sighed and used both hands to help Ji Zheyu up. Ji Zheyu seemed to have been injured by his kick. Half of his shoulder was stiff. Although his expression was normal and there wasn't anything wrong with his expression, Li Chitian could already tell that something was wrong from his movements. He couldn't help but feel a little guilty. Beloved subject, don't take offense. Jun only acted this way because Jun was angry. Ji Zheyu hurriedly bowed again. This subject understands your Majesty's painstaking efforts. Please don't be like this. How could Li Chitian let him kneel again? He helped him up again and purposely avoided talking about court matters. He chatted with Ji Zheyu about domestic matters. In the end, he asked, "Anyang hasn't come to the palace to pay respects to Imperial Mother these days." Imperial Mother even asked about it a few days ago. Ji Zheyu lowered his eyes and said, "The Princess Royal hasn't asked this subject to see her either. However, There are many, many close attendants in the Princess Royal's residence. She should be having a good time. When Li Chitian heard this, he immediately understood. He knew how much his younger sister was spoiled. Anyang's personality was stubborn and spoiled. She was arrogant and self-centered. Although it was mostly political considerations that allowed Ji Zheyu to marry her, from an outsider's point of view, they didn't match. In addition, ever since Ji Zheyu caught Li Helan fooling around with a male companion at Madame Lu's residence, Ji Zheyu seemed to have given up on this marriage. Li Helan was becoming more and more unscrupulous and began to raise male companions in the Princess Royal's residence. Li Chitian was busy with court matters. How could he have the time to consider everything for Li Helan? When the Empress saw that the Empress Dowager didn't care about these things, she naturally wouldn't interfere. So today, Li Helan's reputation for being dissolute had become a secret that everyone knew. Li Chitian said awkwardly, "Forget it. If you like it, Jin will send you a few gentle and pleasant palace attendants to serve you. Jin will talk to Anyang about her." Ji Zheyu heard this and quickly bowed, "Thank you for your Majesty's concern. This subject has no intention of doing this." As the emperor, he wanted to arrange beauties to be by his son-in-law's side. This was really surprising. Normally, when a person married the emperor, they would only ask that he not take concubines and could only wait for the princess to summon him. However, when it came to Li Chitian and Ji Zheyu, Li Chitian actually took the initiative to send a woman to Ji Zheyu. It was obvious how important Ji Zheyu was to Li Chitian. Ji Zheyu stayed in the palace and talked with Li Chitian for a while. Only then did Li Chitian say, "You did very well this time. You took the big picture into consideration. Jin will reward you with 100 taels of gold and a sword. I will send it to your son-in-law's residence later." Ji Zheyu lowered his eyes and kowtowed to express his gratitude. Li Chitian's extravagant bestowal of rewards would certainly have several meanings in other people's eyes. Those who stood on Pang Xiao's side would certainly think that Li Chitian had helped His Majesty do something shameful. But so what? Ji Zheyu's expression was still indifferent. He always did things based on his heart. As long as he felt that it was right, he didn't care about the other consequences. At this time in the Qin residence, Qin Yining saw the Sun clan. The mother and daughter pair stood in front of the gate and wept bitterly on each other's shoulders. The scene of the mother and daughter reuniting moved all the womenfolk present except for the old madam and Qin Huaining. Qin Huayuan led Pang Xiao inside with second old master and third old master and ordered the servants to prepare dinner. Second old madam went forward to persuade her eldest sister-in-law, "Didn't Sister Yi come back safe and sound? Not only is she fine now, but she is also pregnant. Don't just cry in joy when you see your daughter and ignore Sister Yi's health." When Sun Clan heard this, she immediately nodded and held Qin Yining's hand, saying, Right. Look at me, I actually forgot about this. Your father told me. How are you feeling now?" Qin Yining wiped her tears with her sleeve and said helplessly, "Mother, I'm fine." Good. Then let's quickly go inside and talk." The whole family happily walked into the house. Qin Huayuan brought his brothers and nephews to the front hall to drink tea and talk with Pang Xiao. The womenfolk directly entered the inner residence and sat down in the front hall. Old Madam had been ill for a few days and lost a lot of weight. The wrinkles on her face seemed even deeper, and the corners of her eyes drooped into triangles, making her look even more mean. She still hadn't recovered from the shock. How did Qin Yining not only come back safe and sound after being kidnapped by the Taitan, but she was also pregnant? Old Madam looked at Qin Yining suspiciously, as if she wanted to see some clues from her belly that hadn't shown any signs of pregnancy. Was she really pregnant? Or was she too thin, so she was actually pregnant but couldn't find out? Was this child really Pang Xiao's? Thinking of this, Old Madam was frightened by her own thoughts. Pang Xiao was such a malefic person. If he knew that Qin Yining's child wasn't his, wouldn't he chop up the Qin family and feed them to the dogs? Thinking of this, Old Madam was so scared that her face immediately turned pale. Thinking of this, Qin Yining waved her hand and called her forward, "Sister Yi, come here quickly. Grandmother wants to talk to you." If Qin Yining didn't know what dirty things old madam had done behind her back and wanted to push Miss Ba and Qin Huaining to Pang Xiao as concubines while she was away, she might be able to squeeze out a smile to old madam now. But old madam's way of doing things really made her bitterly disappointed. Because of her face and considering that Miss Ba wasn't that kind of girl with a bad nature, Qin Yining didn't ridicule her to her face. Instead, she looked at old madam with an expressionless face and slowly walked over unwillingly. She didn't sit next to old madam but stood to reply. Old madam. Looking at her indifferent appearance, the fire that was suppressed in old madam's heart sprang up. If it wasn't for this little wench, how could her eldest son, who had always been closest to her, have a falling out with her? Old madam was an elder, so she naturally had her own pride. She wanted to be close to Qin Huayuan, but her son seemed to hold a grudge against her. She couldn't take the initiative to curry favor with him. Now that she saw the culprit that caused the conflict between her and her eldest son, although old madam rationally told herself that this granddaughter was now a Wangfei and not an ordinary girl, she still couldn't control her emotions, and the corners of her mouth twitched a little. Did it go smoothly this time? Did anything happen on the way? Qin Yining said faintly, old madam doesn't need to worry. Nothing happened. Granddaughter is fine. Oh, then why did I hear that your majesty was going to hold Wang Yi accountable during the court assembly? Old madam's tone was very gossipy. Chapter 571. Beyond the first rank. Old madam's heart was filled with jealousy. What hadn't she seen in the Dian court in the past? Originally, she thought that after Daeju, she could still count on her eldest son to shine again. But now, her eldest son was estranged from her. The title of nobility that she hadn't received yet was given to her by a married granddaughter. This was a Wangfei and a title of nobility. Even old madam felt envious when she saw this. Not only was old madam envious, but Qin Huaining, who was at the side, lowered her head. In fact, she was clenching her fists so hard that they almost broke. Everything that Qin Yining was enjoying now should be hers. In the past, she was the fourth miss of the family Qin. Everything that she had was taken away by Qin Yining's appearance. Now, one of them was living under someone else's roof in the family Qin, while the other was a Wangfei. This difference between heaven and earth made Qin Huaining feel even more frustrated that he couldn't catch up in this lifetime. He also felt resentful that everything that should have belonged to him had been taken away. For a moment, the scene was strangely quiet. Qin Yining saw old madam's expression and knew what she was thinking. Now, her waist was sore after standing for a long time, so she returned to the Sun Clan's side and sat down. Old madam saw that she hadn't asked her proper question and had actually left without permission, so her face fell. I haven't finished asking, and you're leaving? Is this your good upbringing? Sun Clan. The Sun Clan, who was innocently named, rolled her eyes at old madam. She only cared about holding Qin Yining's hand and quietly asked about the situation outside. Old madam was so angry that her face turned purple in an instant. Qin Huaining and Miss Ba hurriedly handed her tea and patted her back. Old madam took a sip of tea and calmed down. She pointed at the Sun Clan and Qin Yining and cursed, with this kind of upbringing, how can they raise a good child? In the future, could it be that they will also give birth to a good-for-nothing that can anger their mother to death? Just as she finished speaking, a deep male voice came from outside the door, sounding displeased. What's going on? The door curtain was lifted and Pang Xiao walked in first. When he saw old madam's unkind expression that she didn't have time to retract, he only gave her a cold glance and made old madam's words choked in her throat. She was so scared that she couldn't scold him even if she was beaten to death. I didn't expect that after Sister Yi returned home, she would provoke old madam to this extent. She is truly unfilial. It's just that Sister Yi is this king's Wangfei. Her mistake is naturally this king's fault. Let this king apologize to old madam on behalf of Sister Yi. Pang Xiao smiled and walked closer. He cupped his hands and bowed. Old madam, you are the elder of the family. You are the most magnanimous. A manservant came to pass on the message with a smile outside the door. When everyone heard this, They were very happy and went to the front yard together. The eunuch who delivered the imperial edict read out the imperial edict conferring Qin Yining the title of first-rank noble lady. Then, he put away the gold, silk, head ornaments, and other rewards. After the whole family saw it happily and sent a big red envelope, the eunuch left with a smile. In the front yard, the whole family couldn't help but congratulate her again. Apart from being a concubine in the palace, this was probably the highest honor a woman could have in her life, right? Qin Yining wasn't even 20 years old, but she was already a first-rank noble lady. Not only was she a Wangfei, but she also had a husband who treated her so well and adored her. Now, she was even pregnant. It was as if she already had everything that women in the world envied. The whole family talked happily. The Sun clan held Qin Yining's hand and couldn't stop smiling. On the other hand, the Dowager Duchess was envious of the gold and silver. Second Madam even said, "Your Majesty thinks highly of son-in-law." He knew that he would return home first after court, so he sent the rewards over. Second Madam's words were originally meant to compliment Pang Xiao. However, Qin Huayuan and Pang Xiao understood that Li Chitian was monitoring them. By sending the gifts directly to Qin Yining's mansion, he was telling them that Your Majesty already knew that they were in close contact. Logically speaking, it was understandable that a father-in-law and son-in-law had a good relationship. However, Qin Huayuan and Pang Xiao, this father-in-law and son-in-law pair, were not ordinary people. Back then, they worked together to put on a show of discord before they succeeded in making Li Chitian personally grant Qin Yining and Pang Xiao a marriage. If Li Chitian knew that the two of them were like father and son when they were together, and that they often gave each other ideas and leaked some information, he would have long regretted it. But now, Li Chitian probably already knew. Because Qin Huayuan didn't do anything during the court assembly today and didn't help Li Chitian's faction play the Pang Xiao, Li Chitian should have already realized. Thinking of this, Pang Xiao couldn't help but look at Qin Huayuan worriedly. "Father-in-law." Qin Huayuan patted Pang Xiao's sturdy shoulder and said with a smile, "It's okay." His smile was indifferent, as if he didn't care at all. Seeing that Pang Xiao was still looking at him, he couldn't help but laugh. "I'm not young anymore. I've reached the age to play with my grandchildren." Qin Huayuan suddenly said this because he already had the intention to leave the world. Hearing this, Second Master and Second Madam were both worried. Qin Huayuan was now at the prime of his life, and he was also the Minister of Rights. It was only a matter of time before he entered the cabinet and became the Prime Minister. However, he had such thoughts, which was really puzzling and regretful. At this moment, the sound of hurried horse hooves came from outside the courtyard gate. Then, the gate opened, and a grey-robed eunuch came in. Seeing that everyone was present, he announced the decree. By the will of heaven, the Emperor decrees that all men of the Qin clan who are officials in the court will be removed from their positions and will never be employed again. By the Emperor. This sentence caused the originally lively courtyard to explode into silence. Except for Qin Huayuan, who still maintained his calm, everyone else was shocked speechless. Now, in addition to Qin Huayuan, Second Master Qin Shuyuan was also an official. Although Qin Yining's cousins hadn't yet become officials, they were all actively preparing to participate in the imperial examinations to seek an official career. This imperial decree was equivalent to completely cutting off all future prospects of the in-laws in the court. Although the imperial decree meant that Qin Huayuan and Qin Shuyuan were removed from their positions as officials and that they would never be employed again, it didn't include Qin Han, Qin Yu, and the others. However, once this started, who would dare to promote people surnamed Qin? Qin Huayuan calmly received the decree and thanked the emperor. Qin Shuyuan was also stunned for a moment before he thanked the emperor and received the decree. In the silence, old Madam suddenly burst into tears. "Mommy, how could it be like this? How could it be like this? Didn't Your Majesty bestow the title of noble lady to our family's great aunt? How could you turn around and remove her father from his position? What's going on?" Old Madam shouted out the question in everyone's heart. However, questioning the imperial decree was a serious crime. Second Madam and Mammy Qin immediately tacitly covered Old Madam's mouth. The eunuch who delivered the decree originally wanted to reprimand, But when he saw Pang Xiao standing with his hands behind his back, he immediately swallowed his words in fear. Who dared to provoke this person? If things went wrong, he would be killed on the spot. He dared to guarantee that Your Majesty would only say well done when he heard about it later. His death would be in vain. The eunuch didn't dare to stay here any longer and didn't want to hear anything that shouldn't be heard. He immediately took his leave. His attitude was much more polite than when he entered the door. Pang Xiao ordered people to send the eunuch away. Everyone returned to the main room again. At this time, no one covered old madam's mouth, so she began to cry. What a sin! How could it be like this? The son I raised for so many years was actually removed from his position. Sister Yi clearly got a reward just a moment ago, but in the next moment, Brother Meng and Brother Xiu were removed from their positions. How could this be good? In the future, how can our Qin clan continue to be glorious? When old madam cried, second madam's eyes also turned red. The members of the Sun clan were stunned and held Qin Yining's hand in a daze. Chapter 572. Second master recovered from his stupor and hurriedly shook his head. Big brother, what are you saying? We are a family. In the past, when I was basking in your glory, I didn't even thank you. At this time, Big brother should apologize first. Thunder and rain are all His Majesty's grace. How can we, the subjects, control what Your Majesty wants to do? In the future, Big brother is not allowed to say these words to little brother. It will make us estranged. That's right, uncle. Big uncle. Qin Yu also said, His Majesty's decree, we must obey it. Our family has experienced so much in Dian. It is already a blessing that we are able to reunite as a family. There is nothing bad about not being an official and not participating in court disputes. I think so too. Qin Han also persuaded, isn't it better for our family to gather together and live peacefully better than anything else? After experiencing those things in the past, we feel that all fame and fortune are fleeting clouds. As long as our family is still alive and living together, it is the greatest blessing. As for the other riches and honor, when they are glorious, it is like adding oil to a raging fire, but if someone wants to take it away, won't it be taken overnight? We have already seen through these things. The family Qin experienced that catastrophe in Dian and lost so many family members. Anyone with a little bit of heart would not be able to forget the pain of that time. Although there were not many people who were as open-minded as Qin Han, after he mentioned it, they all felt the same. When Qin Huayuan heard this, he couldn't help but be moved. He held back his sour nose and nodded. In the end, it was because I did something wrong in court that caused Your Majesty's dissatisfaction. When the matriarch heard this, she was no longer in a hurry to cry. She pulled Qin Huayuan and asked, Brother Meng, tell me clearly. Why did Your Majesty remove you from your official position? What did you do wrong? You are already so old, but he still put you in an important position. You can even enter the pavilion and become a minister. Why is he suddenly not using you? Could it be? The matriarch looked at Qin Yining and asked suspiciously, why were you removed from your official position when Sister Yi came back? Is it because of Sister Yi? His brother and nephew didn't blame Qin Huayuan, but old madam didn't feel gratified that her children were in the same boat. Instead, she stood out to stir up trouble. Pang Xiao was unhappy to see this, especially when old madam even dragged Qin Yining into this. However, before Pang Xiao could say anything, the members of the Sun clan stood up and grabbed Qin Yining's hand. What you said doesn't make sense. Sister Yi is a womenfolk, and she received a reward from Your Majesty. All the womenfolk in the house didn't receive as much glory as she did. How can you blame her for the men's affairs? Old madam is used to being the head of the family. She should also think about how to be harmonious with her children. Now that she's going, she's saying such words. It's really displeasing. Upon hearing this, old madam flew into a rage. She didn't care who was present at the scene and pointed at the Sun clan. You still have the face to speak. It's all because of you, stupid woman. My brother Meng was so talented in the past. He was the wise Pan and he was appreciated wherever he went. When he first came to Daju, he was valued by your majesty. It's all because of you. It's all because of you. If it weren't for you, stupid woman, would Brother Meng have lost his official career? After scolding without reason, old madam beat her chest and stamped her feet as she burst into tears. She also observed the expressions of the people around her through her tears. When she saw that Qin Huayuan didn't have the slightest intention of comforting her, she cried even more bitterly. It wasn't easy for me to nurture my son. Now, he has lost his official career. I don't want to live anymore. I don't want to live anymore. Old madam cried until Qin Yining's head hurt. Her brows also furrowed into a knot. As an outsider, Pang Xiao couldn't reprimand the mother of his father-in-law, whom he had always respected. Moreover, Qin Huayuan was indeed implicated by him in this matter. Li Qitian's scheme failed today, so he would definitely vent his anger on everyone. He didn't see Qin Huayuan bring people to impeach him in the imperial court. He must have already developed resentment in his heart. As for Ji Zheyu, he still didn't know how Li Qitian would deal with him. When Pang Xiao thought of this, his handsome face, which had been hiding his worry, almost couldn't hide his emotions anymore. Second Furan and second Old Master went to persuade Old Madam. The Sun Clan member pulled Qin Yining's hand and said, "It's too noisy. It's not good for your health. Let's go out first." When Qin Yining heard this, he blushed with shame. He couldn't help but observe Qin Huayuan's expression. Seeing that his father didn't change his expression and didn't seem to care, he was slightly relieved. Qin Yining followed the Sun Clan member out of the main hall. Old Madam's cries were very penetrating. Even if they were standing in front of the courtyard door, they could still hear it clearly. The Sun Clan member said in a low voice, "In the past, when our family was rich, I didn't see her being grateful. Now that your father has been removed from his position, your second uncle and third uncle haven't said anything yet, but she made a fuss first. She's also a mother." Qin Yining hugged the Sun Clan member's arm and comforted her. "Mother, don't say these words in front of father. Don't say it in front of father, lest he be sad." The Sun Clan member nodded and sighed. "Sister Yi, don't take these trivial matters to heart. You're now a person with two bodies. Just focus on taking care of your body. Look at how much weight you've lost on this trip. Your complexion also doesn't look good." Qin Yining's body was nourished by Pang Xiao along the way. If it wasn't for this, when the Sun Clan member saw Qin Yining in the desert, he didn't know how distressed they would be and how much they would cry. In the room, Old Madam's cries gradually weakened. Pang Xiao lifted the warm curtain and came out first. Qin Huayuan, second Old Master, third Old Master, Qin Han, and Qin Yu all came out later. Second Old Mistress, Han second Young Mistress, eighth Young Mistress, Qin Huaining, and the other womenfolk stayed in the room to persuade and comfort Old Madam. Qin Huayuan said, "Now that your majesty is suspicious, it won't be easy to change this impression in the future. Rather than being timid, it's better to live a carefree life and be yourself." Second Old Master also nodded. Today's Imperial Court Assembly's shenanigans could be understood just by thinking about it. Your Majesty wasn't able to take down Pang Xiao and still had to pretend to be magnanimous on the surface to reward Qin Yining. In his heart, he was suppressing a burst of anger. Naturally, he would think of ways to vent his anger. That's why he used the man of his in-laws' family as an example. They should rejoice that Li Qitian was still considered clear-headed. If he was involved with someone like the previous incapable ruler of the Dian dynasty, it was possible that he would directly issue an edict to confiscate the family's property and exterminate the family. They could be considered to have escaped a calamity. Second Old Master then asked, "What plans does eldest brother have for the future?" Qin Huayuan sighed softly. "Actually, I've long been physically and mentally exhausted. I only have this one daughter. In the future, I can only hope to hold a grandson. I don't want to care about other things. Now that your Majesty has already classified me and son-in-law as the same party, no matter what I do, your Majesty's suspicion won't change. Why should I force myself to do anything? It's better to live a bit more freely." Speaking to here, Qin Huayuan looked at Pang Xiao with a smile and said, "Jishi, I don't know what you think about me and your mother-in-law moving to your Wangfu to live together. Chapter 573. Pang Xiao admired Qin Huayuan very much. He was a person who remained calm in the face of change and knew what he wanted at all times and all places. In the face of such a big change, he was not discouraged. Instead, he looked for the best way to let himself and his family live a good life. Moreover, Qin Huayuan proposed to move to the Wangfu for his family's sake. In addition to Qin Huayuan, the family Qin only had second master Qin Shuyuan, who held a position in the imperial court. However, he was only a minor official with no real power. It could be said that whenever the family Qin did something big, Li Qitian would definitely look for Qin Huayuan. Even if someone wanted to assassinate Qin Huayuan for revenge, they would look for Qin Huayuan. The existence of the rest of the in-laws' family was too low. Therefore, Qin Huayuan moved away at this time. Although he said it was for his own sake, in fact, he was afraid of bringing disaster to his family and implicating them. On the other hand, living with Pang Xiao in the Wangfu was convenient for the protection of the Wangfu. At least, Qin Yining and Pang Xiao did not have to be on tenterhooks and had to divert their energy. However, Qin Huayuan definitely missed his family. Even if he moved to the Wangfu, he was inevitably worried that his enemies would not find him and turn to harm the other members of the family Qin. Qin Huayuan was Pang Xiao's father-in-law. It was not good to directly say that he would take the whole family to live in the Wangfu. When Pang Xiao heard this, he immediately said, "Father-in-law and mother-in-law must come. Moreover, there are many empty courtyards in the Wangfu. If second uncle and third uncle are willing to come and live with us, that would be the best." Hearing Pang Xiao's words, second master, third master, Qin Han, Qin Yu, and the others were very surprised. Then, they were a little moved and flattered. What was Pang Xiao's status? In the past, it was always others who flattered and chased after him. It was very rare to hear him flattering someone. Unexpectedly, he was so sentimental that he even brought them along. Although their reactions were not as fast as Pang Xiao's, they understood Qin Huayuan's intentions after thinking about it carefully. They could not help but feel touched. For the safety of his family, Qin Huayuan tactfully made a request to his son-in-law. Second old master was a little hesitant. "Wang Yi's suggestion is certainly good, and we are very grateful for it. But wouldn't it be too much of a bother if we move in together?" "Yeah." Qin Han was a little afraid of causing trouble for Qin Yining. Old Madam was a worrisome person. If she went to live in the Wangfu, wouldn't she also stir up the Wangfu's life? Qin Yining also had his mother-in-law, great-grandfather, and great-grandmother. If Qin Yining was disliked by the elders because of this, it would be their fault. Third old master and Qin Yu had also thought of Qin Han's considerations. They could not be too selfish with other people's good intentions, so they both expressed their rejection. However, Qin Yining smiled and said, "There are indeed a few empty courtyards in the Wangfu. Second uncle, third uncle, and Gij, there's no need to be polite." He turned around and asked Pang Xiao, "When the time comes, can you tidy up Snowplum Courtyard and let our family live there?" Pang Xiao smiled and nodded. "Of course." He then explained, "Snowplum Courtyard is on the west side of the Wangfu. It's a separate courtyard with 3 entrances. It has a separate side door. If you want to leave the Wangfu and don't want to take a detour to go to the main entrance, you can also open the side door separately." Qin Yining said, "Snowplum Courtyard is included in the Wangfu, but you can also close the walkway and open the side door to live alone. This way, our family can live closer, and it's also more convenient for Wang Yi to order people to protect us. When you want to move around, you can open the door on the walkway and casually visit the Wangfu. The degree of freedom is also high." Qin Huayuan listened to his daughter and son-in-law's arrangement and felt very satisfied. He turned around and asked second old master and third old master, "Second brother, third brother, what do you think?" Actually, second old master and third old master were already tempted. They looked at each other and then said, "Why don't we discuss it with old madam?" Qin Huayuan nodded and said, "I won't go in." "Second brother, why don't you go and talk to mother?" Second old master nodded and sighed. "That's good." He hesitated for a moment and then advised, "Mother is in the middle of spring and autumn. It's inevitable that she's a bit muddle-headed. Normally, she's like an old child. Big brother, don't be sad. Mother actually loves you the most. Qin Huayuan smiled and said, of course I know. We're already at this age. How can we bicker with our old mother? Second old master and third old master saw Qin Huayuan's calm and indifferent smile and knew that he was an open-minded person. He really wouldn't bicker with these things. Thus, they felt relieved and went in to persuade him. When old madam first heard that Qin Huayuan wanted to move, she scolded Qin Huayuan on the spot for being an ungrateful wretch who forgot his mother after marrying a wife. However, when she heard that Pang Xiao invited their whole family to move to the Wangfu, she was also a bit tempted. What kind of place was the Wangfu? If she refused, she was afraid that she wouldn't have the chance to enjoy life in the Wangfu in this lifetime. Besides, with her identity, she would be the oldest in the Wangfu. At that time, wouldn't everyone have to provide for her? Old madam smiled through her tears and said somewhat proudly, at least they still know how to be filial. Then, she asked with some worry, what's the situation outside now? If we move, will we also get involved in some trouble? I always feel that this time, your eldest brother was dismissed from his official position by your majesty. It has something to do with Sister Yi and her son-in-law. Old madam's words made second old master and second old madam feel sick. Fortunately, the people from the eldest branch weren't here. Otherwise, they would be heartbroken if they met such a selfish person with good intentions and sincerity. Second old master said sternly, Mother, you can't say these words again in the future. We are officials in the imperial court, so we have to look at heaven's prestige. Heaven's prestige is unpredictable, and we can't control our fortune and misfortune. Now, no one is to blame for this matter. If we want to blame someone, it's because we should have this period in our lives. Sister Yi is a filial child, and eldest brother is even more open-minded. He is also sincerely filial to mother. Don't say these kind of words to make people sad again. Otherwise, we will feel bitterly disappointed when we hear them. Second old madam also smiled and nodded, Mother, don't lower yourself to the same level as us juniors. Old master spoke frankly and had good intentions. You are the most empathetic and magnanimous person. As the saying goes, a prime minister's magnanimity can support a boat. There's also another saying, if you are not stupid and deaf, you can't be a father. Mother is an elder, and we still need you to oversee us. Otherwise, we won't have a backbone in our lives. Second old master and second old madam, one played the good cop and the other played the bad cop, which made old madam lose her temper. Because of her daughter-in-law's words, she nodded and said, all right, then our family will go and live there for the time being. If there's any situation, we will immediately move out. We will order people to look after this residence. When the time comes and we have to move back, we can live there. Second old madam nodded, but in her heart, she rolled her eyes. She really wanted to say that this residence also belonged to Sister Yi. When the family came, their belongings were all stolen by the bandits. How could they still have their own residence? Old madam lived and ate Sister Yi's residence, but she didn't know how to be grateful. Even she, the second aunt, felt embarrassed. Second old master went out to discuss with Qin Huayuan, Pang Xiao, and the others about moving. Once the matter was settled, it was easy to clean up. The thing that the Wangfu didn't lack the least was servants. When Pang Xiao's soldiers fought with the Jinghu Wei, each of them were like little tigers. When it came to moving, they were also capable of doing the work of two people. The Wangfu had all the furniture and bedding. The family only needed to bring their personal clothes and necessities. Therefore, everything was quickly organized. More than a dozen carriages were prepared. Some people were left behind to look after the residents, while the others brought their personal servants and went all the way to the Wangfu. There were always people looking after the Snowplum courtyard. When Pang Xiao came back, he ordered the steward of the Wangfu to make arrangements. Old madam followed the second branch and the third branch and moved into the Snowplum courtyard. Pang Xiao ordered the steward to bring people to help. As for the other matters, they had to wait until they settled down. As for Qin Huayuan and the Sun clan, Qin Yining arranged for them to live in the Shui courtyard, where she had lived for a short time in the Wangfu. The environment here was quiet and elegant. Although there wasn't a separate gate leading to the outside of the Wangfu, it was in an important position in the Wangfu. It was very close to the study in the outer courtyard and could be separated from the inner courtyard. It was convenient to avoid arousing suspicion. After all, Qin Yining still had a single mother-in-law. As for Miss 8, she naturally lived with old Madam. Qin Huaining was Qin Huayuan's adopted daughter, so the Wangfu could only accept her. The Sun clan was afraid that Qin Huaining would cause trouble, so they needed to keep an eye on her. Thus, they took the initiative to say, "Sister Hui will live here with me. You can go to old Madam's place every day when you pay your respects." Qin Huaining had long been fascinated by the Wangfu's large courtyard and elegant and luxurious scenery. The envy and jealousy she felt for Qin Yining was about to break through the sky. Seeing the Sun clan guarding against her as if she was a thief, she felt even more wronged. However, she also wanted to repair the relationship with Qin Huayuan and the Sun clan, so she obediently nodded and agreed. The Sun clan first had the servant girls serve Qin Huaining to the side room to rest. At this time, the sky was already dark. There were lamps in the room, so it was as bright as day. Qin Huayuan saw that Qin Yining was tired, so he said, "You are also tired. Quickly go and rest. We will talk about the rest tomorrow." He then said to Pang Xiao, "I have arranged for people to escort the in-laws back. I believe they will arrive tomorrow or the day after." When Pang Xiao heard this, he smiled and said, "Yes. Father Xiaoyu, during my absence, you helped me take care of my mother and maternal grandparents under your Majesty's surveillance. You must have put in a lot of effort. When we return, let's have a good drink." Hearing them say this, the Sun clan was very surprised because she didn't know about these things. Pang Xiao took Qin Yining and left Su Shui Garden. The sky was already completely dark. There were servant girls in the front holding the lamps. Qin Yining's waist was a bit sore, so her steps were also slow. Seeing her like this, Pang Xiao simply picked her up horizontally. Qin Yining was caught off guard and cried out softly. She hurriedly hugged Pang Xiao's neck. "What are you doing? Quickly put me down. You are tired. Be good and rest for a while. I asked them to prepare some plain porridge and side dishes. You can rest after you go back and eat." Qin Yining couldn't help but laugh when she heard this. She rested her head on Pang Xiao's shoulder and felt his strong arms steadily supporting her. Their steps were light and without any bumps as they walked towards the upper courtyard. She was tired and didn't want to talk. Her heart was full of gratitude towards Pang Xiao's arrangements today, so she rubbed her cheek against his shoulder. Pang Xiao's heart melted. He lowered his head and kissed her forehead. His tone was gentle as he said, "Good girl." Not long after, Pang Xiao stopped in his tracks. "Sister Yi, look." Qin Yining was already drowsy. When she heard this, she opened her eyes in a daze. "What's wrong?" Pang Xiao raised his chin. Qin Yining followed his gaze and saw a brand new plaque hanging high above the lintel of the upper courtyard under the warm yellow light of the lanterns. The familiar handwriting read Sai Ching. Chapter 574. Pang Xiao nodded and looked lovingly at the person in his arms. "At first, I couldn't find you. You were in a terrible fix every day. All I wanted to do was to find you. Time passed quickly. Later, when I heard that you were in Tartar, my heart calmed down a little, and time slowed down. Father-in-law and I discussed it. At the time, it was not a good time to leave Jing to find you. I could only wait in the Fu. I was too lazy to pay attention to the matters of the court. When I was free, I would make some things. This plaque was made at the time." She hadn't thought that he had not just written the words, even the plaque had been made by him. Qin Yining smiled but her eyes became wet again. Pang Xiao saw the tears in her eyes. He felt both helpless and distressed. He carried her as they walked inside. "Why are you crying again?" He found that ever since Qin Yining became pregnant, she became emotional easily. Qin Yining was slightly embarrassed. But when she thought about how Pang Xiao had lived after she had disappeared, her heart became sore and distressed. If she was in his position, if she was Pang Xiao, she would have gone crazy with worry. The servants saw Pang Xiao come back with Wang Fei in his arms. They didn't dare to look. Everyone had smiles on their faces and went to lift the bamboo curtain for them. The room was already lit. The dim yellow silk lanterns caused the room to appear especially warm. Pang Xiao carefully placed Qin Yining on the bed with a soft mattress. He personally took off the pearl hairpins and earrings on her head, letting her slightly curly long hair fall behind her back. He squatted on the edge of the bed and took off her shoes and socks. His movements were gentle and affectionate. Qin Yining's hands were on the sides of her body as she looked with smiling eyes at Pang Xiao. Pang Xiao occasionally raised his head and met Qin Yining's gaze. When he met her gentle eyes, he couldn't help but smile. After they got married, they were ordered to leave the capital before they could get used to living in their new house. Now that they were back home, Qin Yining could finally relax, but he still sighed in his heart. Grandpa, Grandma, and Mother will be back tomorrow, right? Qin Yining asked. Pang Xiao nodded and said, Father-in-law is very cautious. When I left the capital to look for you, I asked father-in-law to hide them. I was afraid that your majesty would vent his anger on them while I was away, so father-in-law secretly did it. He hid people, and even I couldn't find him. And every time I meet my father-in-law, I feel that whatever he says is reasonable, and I will listen to whatever he says. Although I know that father-in-law is right, I feel like I've been bewitched. It's very strange. Qin Yining chuckled. What's so strange about that? It's just that my father is a charming person. Pang Xiao nodded. Indeed. By the way, I saw that the two young ladies of your mansion also came. If they get together with old madam, it's inevitable that they will cause trouble. Why don't I pay attention to see if there are any suitable families? They are of the right age. It's good if you are willing to help. Qin Yining nodded with a smile. He was very touched that Pang Xiao was willing to help his family Qin think of all kinds of trifles. The two of them had a good night's sleep. With each other by their side, they felt at ease. In the afternoon of the next day, Qin Yining had just taken a nap on the warm couch after lunch when a maidservant came back and said, Princess, old master, old madam, and old madam are back. Qin Yining was overjoyed when he heard this. He hurriedly got up, but his head was still buzzing. His body swayed and was supported by the maidservant beside him. Princess, don't be anxious. Old madam and old madam must be going to Pine Crane Hall when they come back. Let me help you go to Pine Crane Hall first. Qin Yining was very heavy now, so he didn't dare to run at will. Otherwise, he would have rushed out. Hearing this, he could only nod and walk out slowly with the maidservant. After leaving Saiqing Garden, they went all the way to Pine Crane Hall along the long corridor. Along the way, all the servants in the mansion stopped to salute and respectfully called her princess. Qin Yining had a light pink dress on his shoulder. He held the maidservant's waist with one hand and was protected by an old nanny who opened her arms like an old hen protecting her chicks. Behind them were 4 second-class maidservants. They hurried forward to greet her. Suddenly, they heard a conversation in front of them. Qin Yining looked up and saw the tall, slightly fat but vigorous Madame Ma and the beautiful Yarrow clan walking in the front. Pang Xiao and Yarrow Chenggu were walking behind, talking and laughing. Seeing Qin Yining, Madame Ma smiled and squinted her eyes. She left her daughter and walked quickly to Qin Yining. Good girl, let Grandma see you. Grandma. Qin Yining was about to kneel, but Madame Ma held her hands with both hands and didn't let her kneel. Don't do this. Our family doesn't like that. Good girl, you suffered outside. It's good that you're back. It's good that you're back. Let me tell you, Dai Fu, that brat, lost you. I've beaten him for you. Let's see if he dares to ignore you in the future. If he can lose his wife, what else can he do? As she spoke, she turned around and glared at Pang Xiao. Pang Xiao stood to the side with Yarrow Chenggu. Both father and son had honest smiles on their faces. Yarrow clan smiled faintly and didn't say anything. Qin Yining turned around and bowed to Yarrow Chenggu and Yarrow clan respectively. Grandpa, Mom. Yarrow Chenggu smiled and nodded. Good, good. As long as you're fine, nothing else matters. Yes. Yarosha also smiled. During this period of time, it was as if our Da Fu had lost its soul. Now that you've returned, everything is fine. Your maternal grandfather and grandmother both said that nothing else is important. The most important thing is that being safe is good fortune. A perfectly fine daughter has been married into our family. If something were to happen to you, we wouldn't know how to explain it to our in-laws. Qin Yining smiled and nodded, yes. But in her heart, she had already seen through their behavior. Madame Ma sincerely cared about her, welcomed her, and had no doubts about her. Yaro Chungu was shrewd. From his words, she could tell that he already had doubts about her, but he didn't like to show it on the surface. He only said, nothing else matters. This mother-in-law of the Yarrow clan must have deep doubts about her chastity. She didn't really care about her, but used some meaningless words to beat her. There was nothing wrong with her words, but when they were serialized, she felt suffocated for no reason. Qin Yining had good self-restraint. During Dian, she learned etiquette from the nannies in the palace. Therefore, no one could see the suffocation in her heart at this moment. Except for Pang Xiao. Pang Xiao didn't like the Yarrow clan's words. She said, Mother, don't worry. My father-in-law's family are all reasonable people. When I lost Sister Yi, my father-in-law didn't say anything. A few days ago, I almost died. It was my father-in-law and second uncle who gave up their positions to save me. If they blame me because of Sister Yi, why would they help me? Family Qin people are kind and honest. They won't do that. When the Yarrow clan heard that Pang Xiao almost died, they immediately became worried. What happened? Was it because you left the capital without permission? She frowned and couldn't help but glance at Qin Yining from the corner of her eyes. Her eyes were full of resentment. Qin Yining felt angry, wronged, and helpless when she looked at him. She felt suffocated and couldn't help but cover her mouth and retch. Oh, what's wrong with this child? Madame Ma was startled. She hurriedly pulled Qin Yining's hand and found that her palm was full of cold sweat. She asked worriedly, Come on, Bing Tang girl, come and check on your daughter. Yes. Bing Tang, Ji Yun, Xian Yun, and Lian Xiaoju, who had been standing at the back, hurriedly ran over. They had been following Madame Dowager and the other two outside these days. Ji Yun and Xian Yun also taught Bing Tang and Lian Xiaoju a lot of rules. They had just reunited with the main family, so it was not appropriate for them to go forward. Qin Yining's sight was blocked by Madame Ma and the others, so she didn't see them standing far away. At this time, when she saw Bing Tang and the others, Qin Yining resisted the urge to vomit, but she was still happy in her heart. She heard from Pang Xiao that they were still alive. Now that she saw them, she was completely relieved. Princess, how are you? Ji Yun held Qin Yining's hand. Madame Ma stepped aside and let Bing Tang treat Qin Yining. Bing Tang checked the pulse and made a sound of surprise. Then she smiled and said, Wang Fei, you are 3 months pregnant. You have already started to take medicine to nourish the fetus. Qin Yining nodded. She frowned and pursed her lips, but her eyes were full of joy. Bing Tang, Ji Yun, Xian Yun, and Lian Xiaoju all laughed happily. The girls' laughter was sweet and pleasant. They congratulated her repeatedly, and the atmosphere became lively. Madame Ma's eyes widened in surprise, and then she clapped her hands and laughed. The wrinkles at the corners of her eyes became deeper. Oh, that's great, that's great. Hey, why didn't you say so earlier? You just got pregnant and your body is weak. Why don't you lie down? Grandmother, I'm fine. Qin Yining smiled. She was very grateful for Madame Ma's care. Under the Yarrow clan's suspicion and Yarrow Chungu's indifference, Madame Ma's sincerity was even more moving. Yarrow clan looked at Qin Yining with a frown, and then turned to look at Pang Xiao. There was no joy in their eyes, and their frown deepened. Pang Xiao saw the Yarrow clan's reaction and understood. She said, We walked for more than 5 months on the way back. The road was desert and cold. Sister Yi was captured by the female Taitan Khan. She wanted to threaten Da Ju, and she was tortured. Her body has always been weak. It's my fault. I shouldn't have let her get pregnant at this time. Hey, look at me. Let's go back and rest first. As she spoke, she went to support Qin Yining. Although she didn't hug her, she used her large hand to squeeze Qin Yining's small hand. The warmth passed from her fingers to her heart. Qin Yining's heart was very moved. Madame Ma didn't care about these things. She only felt that the child's safe return was more important than anything else. Now that she was pregnant with Pang Xiao's child, it was even better. After hearing Pang Xiao's words, she nodded happily and worriedly. Okay. Dai Fu, quickly send your wife to rest. Give her supplements, ginseng, and cinnamon. We have plenty of money, so don't be stingy. Pang Xiao smiled and nodded. Don't worry. For your great-grandson, I will definitely not be stingy. Chapter 575. On the other hand, Yarou Chungu and his daughter didn't look too happy. They didn't look as happy as Madame Ma. Qin Yining had been kidnapped by the Taitan for a long time. Her appearance was like this. In their impression, the Taitan people were valiant people who ate raw meat and drank blood. What kind of man wouldn't be tempted by such an exquisite and beautiful girl? If Qin Yining wasn't pregnant and came back clean, they wouldn't doubt the child's bloodline even if she had a child in the future. They were afraid that Pang Xiao would be blinded by her beauty and raise someone else's child without knowing it. Yarou Chungu looked at Madame Ma's back as she held Qin Yining's hand and walked in front of them. He felt a burst of depression and helplessness in his heart. He secretly thought that this old woman's heart was too big. She wasn't afraid that her grandson would be labeled as a cuckold. Yarou Chungu felt melancholy. He took out the brass smoking pipe from behind his back and took out the tobacco from the small brocade pouch hanging on the pipe. Madame Ma heard the noise and turned around to look. She scolded with a sullen face, "You old man, Dai Fu's wife is pregnant. Why are you still smoking? Quickly put it away." If it was in the past, Yarou Chungu didn't want to quarrel with Madame Ma and obediently put away the tobacco. But at this moment, Yarou Chungu was thinking that perhaps his grandson had been cuckolded and didn't even know it. Who knew if the time he had just said was accurate? Perhaps the girl was pregnant with a barbarian bastard. He felt depressed, so he lowered his head and pressed the tobacco with his rough fingers, pretending that he hadn't heard Marsha's words. In fact, Madame Ma had been holding back her anger for a long time. Ever since the Yarou clan said so many unconscionable things behind her back, she was so angry that she beat her with the sole of her shoe. However, Yarou Chungu said that they wouldn't abandon the Qin clan, but would support Dai Fu to take in a concubine. At that time, she felt that the father and daughter's actions were beyond her expectations. But now, the news of Qin Yining's pregnancy didn't make the Yarou clan and Yarou Chungu happy. Instead, they showed such an expression. Madame Ma's anger grew stronger and stronger. Madame Ma looked at Qin Yining. She was afraid that the noise would make her unhappy, so she could only suppress her anger. She pulled Pang Xiao and said, "People have a conscience. Yining's parents spent so much effort to raise her well. Yining's parents. Too. Since she's good to you, you have to be good to her. You also have to be good to her parents. They only gave you a daughter. When you're old, as the son-in-law, you have to show them what you're capable of. Do you understand? Whatever you do, your children will learn from you. If you don't do well now, when your children learn, they will treat you the same way when you're old." As she spoke, she pinched Pang Xiao's muscular arm. Pang Xiao had heard his grandmother's nagging since he was a child. He felt that it was very affectionate, so he said with a smile, "Grandma, I know. This time, something happened outside. I also implicated father-in-law and sister Yi. Her second uncle lost his official position. I was afraid that father-in-law and his family would be in danger because of me, so I took the initiative to clean up the Snowplum courtyard and Su Shui garden. I invited father-in-law and his family to move in so that it'll be easier for us to protect them." Madame Ma smiled and said, "That's good. Is old Madame Ma here too?" "She's here too. Old Madame Ma is good to Sister Yi, and Sister Yi is filial to old Madame Ma. When Sister Yi is pregnant, father-in-law and his family are very happy. Now that they're living close to each other, everyone is happy. Madame Ma nodded repeatedly and didn't suspect anything. I'll go talk to my elder sister later. I've been looking forward to having someone to talk to. Usually, the Fu is so quiet. Now that it's lively, it feels like a home. At the back, the Yarrow clan and Yarrow Chungu frowned even deeper. Yarrow Chungu fiercely smacked his pipe and thought repeatedly in his heart, isn't this inviting a wolf into the house? That family Qin's official position has been taken away. Your Majesty definitely won't like it. If they live in the Fu like this, won't they implicate the Fu? What the Yarrow clan was thinking was, how are they going to calculate the cost of living together? Don't tell me they want her son to support two families. The Yarrow clan blurted out, when did this happen? You're already so old, but you're still so careless. Why didn't you discuss it with us first? You invited the in-laws just like this. Aren't you afraid of neglecting them? Qin Yining walked side by side with Pang Xiao and Madame Ma at the front. Although she didn't look back to observe, she clearly saw everyone's confrontation in her heart. The Yarrow clan suspected that she was unfaithful and that the child in her belly wasn't Pang Xiao's. This already made her secretly endure her anger. She didn't want to have discord with Pang Xiao's family. After all, they were living under the same roof. They still had a long time to live together. Once they had a falling out, it would be difficult for them to see each other in the future. It would also inevitably put Pang Xiao in a dilemma. Pang Xiao was already surrounded by enemies in the imperial court. It didn't make sense for him to return home and still be in chaos. However, it seemed that the Yarrow clan didn't take her patience seriously. Perhaps the Yarrow clan would even think that she didn't say anything because she felt guilty toward Pang Xiao. Thinking of this, Qin Yining smiled and stopped walking. He turned around and said, "Mother-in-law, you're treating us as outsiders. Although my family is temporarily living in the prince's mansion, they aren't living in those two courtyards for free. It just so happens that our family's original residence is a bit crowded. We plan to move to another place. However, every inch of land in the capital is worth an inch of gold. There are so many people that rarely give up their residence. We can't find a suitable place in such a short time. The courtyards in the prince's mansion are empty. They're also secretly subsidizing me. That's why they said that they rented Snow Plum Courtyard and Shui Yu Yuan. Normally, we can just close the back alley door and live our own lives. Naturally, food and other things are not in the same place. My hometown is in the Yang dynasty. There are many fields and old residences near the old capital. There are also hot springs villas. However, it's too far away. Now that the situation is tense, it's inconvenient to leave the capital. Otherwise, my grandmother said that she would go to the south. When they heard Qin Yining call the Yarrow clan mother-in-law instead of mother, everyone present understood that Qin Yining was well aware of their confrontation just now. Neither of them should treat the other as a fool. The Yarrow clan's expression became even more unsightly. She curled the corners of her mouth and said, "You're talking like an outsider. Even if we lend it to your family, it's fine. Why should we ask for rent? I understand what mother-in-law means." Qin Yining smiled and said, "However, even blood brothers have to settle accounts clearly. Besides, we're not blood brothers. Mother-in-law, you don't have to worry. My parents will only subsidize us more. As for children, I know what you're thinking. No matter if it's a son or a daughter, they're still my children. In other words, even without you surnamed Rong, I can still afford to raise them. At worst, I'll just raise them myself. Why should I be afraid of them?" Pang Xiao was already distressed. She was afraid that Qin Yining's anger would harm his health. Looking at the Yarrow clan's appearance, she also felt quite angry. She held Qin Yining's arm with one hand to help her breathe. Qin Yining's gaze moved away from the Yarrow clan's pale face and turned to look at Yarrow Chungu with a smile. "Esteemed elder, I'm scared that I'll choke when I smell your smoke. I'm afraid that it'll hurt your great-grandson. Can you stop smoking? In the future, when I go to Pine Crane Hall to pay my respects, I'll ask you to smoke next door. Otherwise, it won't be good for the child." Yarrow Chungu's expression was as unsightly as the Yarrow clan's. His lips trembled and his beard trembled. After a while, he knocked the tobacco pipe on the bottom of his shoe and stepped on the ashes that had fallen to the ground. He said mockingly, "Daughters of noble families are more precious than rural women. Esteemed elder is right." Chin Ening stood there in a dignified manner. She was clearly telling Yarrow Chungu that she was originally a daughter of a respectable family, so he shouldn't use the method of bullying a country bumpkin to bully others. Could it be that he thought she would pinch her nose and resign herself to it? The Yarrow clan and Yarrow Chungu were furious. They secretly scolded Chin Ening for being so improper. Seeing that Chin Ening was so unyielding, Madame Ma had no more doubts about her pregnancy. If she had a guilty conscience, wouldn't she have to lower herself and be a concubine? Ye lass, don't lower yourself to the level of those two country bumpkins. There's no need for rent at all. Your father and uncle sacrificed their careers for the Dai Fu. You're living together as a family, yet you still want to collect rent. Is that even something a human would do? Let's go, Grandma will send you back. I'll see if there's anything missing in your room. Madame Ma slapped Pang Xiao's hand away from Chin Ening's shoulder and snorted, "You're just standing there and watching your wife get bullied? If you're a man in the future, you'd better stand firm. If someone bullies your wife, can't you be a little angry?" Pang Xiao was scolded quite innocently. "Grandma, do you mean that I should bully my mother and grandfather?" As soon as he said that, Madame Ma laughed. "Yes. If anyone bullies your wife, you should bully them back." As she spoke, she turned around and glared fiercely at Yarrow Chungu. "Is this old man an old fool? Go back and find a doctor to take a good look at you to see if there's water in your brain." After saying that, she took Chin Ening's hand and went to Sai Ching Garden. Pang Xiao's gloominess dissipated a lot. He followed behind Madame Ma with a smile and said, "If it's an outsider, I'll naturally let them do whatever they want. But if it's my own family, I can only ignore them." Yarrow Chungu and Yarrow clan stood in place and watched Madame Ma and Pang Xiao protect Chin Ening on either side as they walked away. The father and daughter were quite angry. The two didn't want to provoke them, so they went back to Pine Crane Hall first. When they returned to Pine Crane Hall, Big White and Big Black had already been sent back by the servants. When they saw the father and daughter, they jumped over. Yarrow Chungu was angry, but he kicked Big White away. Big White was intelligent. The little Pekingese whimpered when it was kicked, and it carefully shook its tail twice. Big Black nudged Big White with its mouth. One tall, one short, one black, and one white, simply ran away. Yarrow Chungu went back into the room and started smoking again. Yarrow clan sat on the edge of the Kang bed. She pressed her lips together and pinched the table. Her delicately decorated nails were almost broken. "Dad, what do you think we should do about this? Do you think the child in Chin clan's belly is really our family's child?" Chapter 576. That may be the case, but look at how arrogant the Chin clan is. The Yarrow clan sneered, "What kind of lady is she? She's just a stray girl who wandered outside in her early years. She doesn't know how to respect her elders and has no manners at all." If this was in the general's estate, the only reason Big Madam could make her follow the rules until she died was because she had a soft mother-in-law like me. The Yarrow clan felt much better after scolding her for a while. She let out a sigh of relief and said, "She doesn't call me mother. That's good, I'm too lazy to listen. I didn't raise her anyway. Do you expect me to stick dog meat to sheep? If she wants to pay the rent, she better hurry up. I'm afraid that Dai Fu, that silly girl, will be so charming that she'll pay the rent." After hearing his daughter complain, Yarrow Chungu said, "That's not right. No matter what, you have to consider Dai Fu's future in the imperial court. Minister Chin isn't an ordinary person. Even if he's no longer an official in the imperial court, he's still an outstanding strategist. His daughter is with our Dai Fu. In the future, no matter what problems our Dai Fu faces, won't he risk his life to help our Dai Fu find a solution?" "Don't talk like that in the future." "That's true." The Yarrow clan thought for a while and said worriedly, "Father, Do you think the child in the Qin clan's belly is really Dai Fu's? Is there a mistake? Hi, Dai Fu is very shrewd. Yarrow Chungu didn't say anything else and continued to smoke. Actually, when he was asked by the Yarrow clan, he had some doubts in his heart. Looking at Qin Yining and Pang Xiao's attitude, he felt that the child was Pang Xiao's. But who could guarantee such a thing? Moreover, that girl was born with a beautiful appearance. What if Dai Fu liked her and was charmed by her and helped her hide it? These young people were easily swayed by their emotions. It was understandable that they would do things that made others helpless when they were hot-headed. Moreover, even if this child was Pang Xiao's, what if she had served someone else before? He felt a little disgusted that such a dirty woman was serving his grandson. Yarrow Chungu put down his opium pipe and began to crack his melon seeds again. His eyes, however, were always in a daze. He kept thinking about the current situation. Pang Xiao was still young, so it was understandable for him to be impulsive. However, as an elder, he had to help Pang Xiao to prevent him from being cheated without knowing it. Right at this moment, someone came in from outside. "Old master, the in-law wishes to see you." Yarrow Chungu and the Yarrow clan were stunned and looked at each other. What a coincidence. Isn't it too much of a coincidence that Qin Huayuan came? Could it be that he had heard something? "Invite Mr. In-law in." Yarrow Chungu stood up and shook off the melon seed shells on his body. The maidservants quickly cleaned up the table and the floor. The Yarrow clan thought for a moment and didn't avoid him. Instead, they stood beside Yarrow Chungu. Not long after, a thin and tall middle-aged man with an aura like that of a banished immortal lifted the curtain and walked in. Looking at his appearance and aura, one would think of the nickname Wise Pan, and because the wisdom and intelligence between his eyebrows couldn't be hidden. His appearance and aura were also outstanding. Qin Huayuan came in and bowed to Yarrow Chungu. "Old Master Yarrow, in-law. I heard from my bodyguards that they had escorted you back safely, so I hurried over to take a look. You must have been tired along the way." Yarrow Chungu's eyebrows twitched when he heard this. If he was a straightforward person, he probably wouldn't have analyzed the situation. Qin Huayuan's words were completely correct. However, after the unpleasant incident just now, Yarrow Chungu couldn't help but think, sure enough, he had been in the imperial court for many years and had the title of Wise Panan. When he spoke, he played down the situation, but every word he said hit the nail on the head. The short conversation just now had pointed out two important points. First, Old Master Yarrow was surnamed Yarrow, and this prince's family was surnamed Yao. Even in-law was only a woman and didn't have the qualifications to participate in men's affairs. Second, they were able to safely return to the prince's mansion now thanks to Qin Huayuan's secret protection during this period of time. If he didn't take care of them, they would have been captured by Li Chitian after Pang Xiao left. And now they were talking about the reunion. Yarrow Chungu narrowed his eyes and enthusiastically gave up his seat. It wasn't hard, it wasn't hard. Old Master Yarrow arranged everything very well. We didn't suffer much along the way. Servants, quickly bring some good tea. Qin Huayuan smiled politely and then sat down on the seat next to him. He said with a smile, "My daughter is clumsy. She climbed up the social ladder to enter the prince's mansion. She has only been married for a short time. If there is anything she can't do, please teach her a lesson. As her father, I won't have the slightest complaint." As he spoke, he took out 3 banknotes worth 1,000 taels from his sleeve. They were all stamped with the big seal of Baotong. They could be used to withdraw shining silver from all the Baotong branches in the country. Qin Huayuan put the banknotes on the table and pushed them to Old Master Yao. He said with a smile, "This is the money for renting the Snowplum Courtyard and Su Shui Garden. They just got married. Although Sister Yi's dowry is generous, my wife and I are afraid that they are young and don't know anything. What if they spend extravagantly? She could do whatever she wanted with the dowry money. I'll have to trouble Old Master Yarrow and Old Madam to help keep these 3,000 taels, lest they be ordered around because of their young age. As elders, we are doing this for the sake of our children. Don't you think so?" Qin Huayuan said with a gentle smile. Whether it was his smile or his voice, It made people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. Yarrow Chungu did, but in his heart, he scolded Qin Huayuan for being too cunning. What did he mean by "for the sake of his children"? What did he mean by "for the sake of his children"? What he meant was that the money was his daughter's. The money was given to his daughter by him as a father. They could only look at it but couldn't use it. Moreover, Qin Huayuan's meaning was clear. The Qin family didn't live in the prince's mansion for free. They lived in the prince's mansion righteously. Even if they didn't have to pay rent, wasn't it natural for them to live in their daughters' and son-in-law's houses? There was another meaning, which made Yarrow Chungu even more sullen. "I've already paid. Don't you want to express your gratitude?" Yarrow Chungu really wanted to wave his hand and express his gratitude, but wouldn't that benefit others? What's more, his living expenses were all paid for by the prince's mansion. He didn't have any family wealth to show off. Thinking of this, Yarrow Chungu looked at Qin Huayuan's gentle smile and understood even more. This guy's meaning should be, since you can't take out the money to express your gratitude, then treat my daughter better, right? Had the news of what happened on the walkway really spread out? Yarrow Chungu felt a little embarrassed, as if he had been ruthlessly slapped in the face by 3,000 taels of banknotes. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. As expected of an old fox who had rolled around in the imperial court. On the surface, the meaning of his words was clear. Even if his words were recorded on paper, the people who saw it wouldn't think much of it. They would only think that he was a very good father-in-law, a qualified father, and even a very soft and gentle in-law. However, when combined with his tone and expression, his words didn't mean the same thing. It was very easy for people to understand the several layers of meaning behind his words. Unfortunately, he couldn't find any words to refute it, and he couldn't repeat his words to Pang Xiao. Because if he said it, perhaps Pang Xiao would think that he was sowing discord as a grandfather. Yarrow Chungu felt that he wasn't stupid and was dignified enough. Who knew that after being scolded by the little lass and having no choice but to put out his cigarette, the little lass's father would come knocking on his door to slap him in the face? Now that a few slaps had come, he had no choice but to accept it. If he kept the money and it spread, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to explain it clearly in the future. He wouldn't be able to explain it to Dai Fu. The smile on Yarrow Chungu's face was about to stiffen. He could only sullenly push the banknotes back to Qin Huayuan and say, "Sister Yi is a good girl." It's Dai Fu's fortune that she took a fancy to him. Ever since she married into the family, our family has liked her very much. Her maternal grandmother dotes on her as if she were the apple of her eye. This time, she went out with us and lost a lot of weight. I also feel guilty in my heart. I've always felt that I've let Sister Yi down, and I've also let you down, in-law. Your family's friendly daughter married into the family, but the current situation in the imperial court is like this. However, don't worry. Our family definitely won't lack Sister Yi's food and clothing. You should take back the 3,000 taels. Isn't it normal for a family to live together? If you still say that it's not considered rent, wouldn't it be too distant? Qin Huayuan smiled and shook his head, pushing the banknotes back. I know old Master Yarrow's good intentions, but the rent must be paid. I also know that old master, old madam, and in-law are all honest and kind people. They definitely won't take my rent. However, there's no harm in settling the account. I originally wanted to calculate the rent and then pay extra money. However, I expected that Wang Yi wouldn't take the less than 100 taels a year. Therefore, I directly put these banknotes here with old Master Yarrow. Qin Huayuan stood up and said with a smile, "Old Master Yarrow has worked hard today, so I won't disturb you anymore. Sister Yi is pregnant now. She's a little girl and doesn't know how to behave. If she offends you in any way and refuses to listen to you, just tell me. I'll go back and teach her a good lesson." The money had been paid, and the family Qin didn't owe the Wang mansion anything. Moreover, the family Qin's daughter was the princess consort and the mistress of the Wang mansion. No matter what, it wasn't their turn to bully the mistress of the family. The family Qin had paid the rent. Had the Yarrow family paid the rent? In the future, if there was any dissatisfaction, just tell him. Don't make things difficult for a pregnant woman. Qin Huayuan cupped his hands and turned to go out without waiting for Yarrow Chungu and the Yarrow clan to speak. Yarrow Chungu looked at the 3,000 taels banknotes on the table, his face turning red and then white. The Yarrow clan's face turned red. They gritted their teeth and said, "Father, what do you think he means? The daughter he raised didn't abide by the virtue of a woman. How can he have the nerve to criticize us so righteously?" Chapter 577. Father, what do you mean? The Yarrow clan was a little confused. Yarrow Chungu put the banknotes into his arms, picked up the opium pipe, and slowly filled it with tobacco. The biggest problem now is that the baby in the Qin clan's belly may not be the Dai Fu's. The Yarrow clan was stunned for a moment, and then suddenly understood. His face was a little pale. "Father, you mean..." Yarrow Chungu smoked, squinted, and didn't say anything. The Yarrow clan sat on the edge of the kang and was lost in thought. After a while, he said, "If the Dai Fu knows about this, can't you do a clean job and not let the Dai Fu know about it? The baby in the girl's belly is of unknown origin, and it will be troublesome if it is born. Since the family Qin is strong, and the Dai Fu needs a father-in-law, the marriage was granted by your majesty, and we can't abandon the Qin clan. Then let her be clean and have a baby whenever she wants. We can guarantee that she will have a baby in the future. But, the girl is not even 18 years old. At this age, if she is hurt and can't have a baby in the future, what will happen? Will the Dai Fu never have a concubine in his life?" The Yarrow clan looked at Yarrow Chungu's kind and gentle face, and the hesitation in his heart gradually turned into determination. "Father, you are right. As a mother, I must be responsible for my son. I can't let the Dai Fu's bloodline be unknown. I will think of a way. Father, you. Madam Dowager is back." The voice of a maidservant came from outside. The Yarrow clan immediately shut up. In a breath, Mrs. Ma lifted the curtain and walked in quickly. She frowned and asked directly, "Where is the banknote?" "Mother." The Yarrow clan stood up. Yarrow Chungu was also a little surprised. When he was about to ask the Yarrow clan how they knew, the opium pipe in his hand was taken away by Mrs. Ma. Mrs. Ma knocked the ash in the pipe into the spittoon, and then held one side of the pipe with one hand, raised her leg and fiercely stamped on it. With a crack sound, the jade pipe and the brass opium pipe were split into two. Mrs. Ma angrily threw the pipe on the ground. "Smoke it. Are you crazy?" Yarrow Chungu suddenly stood up. Yarrow Sha also came over to advise her. "Mother, what are you doing? Everything was fine, why did you take out father's cigarette? Get out of here and kneel down." Ma Sha raised her hand and slapped her, causing Yarrow Sha's face to tilt to one side. A red handprint quickly appeared on her cheek. Yarrow Sha covered her face and looked at Ma Sha in disbelief. "Mother, why did you hit me?" "That's right, I hit you. You wicked, wicked girl. Don't you understand what I tell you? Look at what you two are doing today." Mrs. Ma pushed the Yarrow clan to the side and pointed at Yarrow Chungu. "Surnamed Yarrow, I know what you're thinking. I've been with you for decades, and I know what kind of shit you're going to do. Let me tell you, don't cause any more trouble for me. Return the money to the in-laws as soon as possible. Otherwise, don't blame me for being impatient." Surnamed Ma. Yarrow Chungu was also furious and slammed the table loudly. "You're trying to turn the world upside down. Don't forget who's in charge of this family." "Charge? Are you trying to say that you're in charge? This is the prince's mansion. Men are in charge of external affairs and women are in charge of internal affairs. The one in charge of external affairs is Dai Fu, and the one in charge of internal affairs is the princess consort and Yi. Who do you think you are? Put away your filthy thoughts. I've been honest and upright all my life, but I actually married a wicked person like you." "How am I wicked?" "I'm thinking for Dai Fu, and I'm afraid that he'll raise a child for free. Is there anything wrong with that? Dai Fu isn't a fool. How could he not know whether that child is his own child? Other people are overjoyed to have a great-grandson and live under the same roof as their in-laws. How wonderful would that be? But when it comes to you two, it's like your nose is your nose and your eyes are your eyes. Sister Yi went out with Dai Fu to help with the disaster this time. Do you know how much of her dowry money was used? If it weren't for that money, Your Majesty might have already dealt with our Dai Fu. Our in-laws ordered people to protect us and hide us these days, and you actually want 3,000 taels of silver from them. Are you still human? I didn't take it. He gave it to me. Besides, why do we have to hide? Didn't Dai Fu go out to look for Qin's daughter? Shouldn't he be protecting us? Bullshit. Don't you know why Sister Yi was kidnapped? The family Qin hasn't blamed us yet, but you're acting like this. Has your mother's brain been kicked by a donkey? Madame Ma was so angry that she slapped down. The Kang table was directly smashed into pieces. The table was broken into several pieces, and the legs of the table were also broken. Compared to Yarrow Chungu's slaps just now, it was as powerful as it was in the past. It could be imagined that if this slap hit someone, it would at least break their bones and tendons. Madame Ma pointed at Yarrow Chungu's nose. You, surnamed Yarrow, are not a good person. You're wicked, and the daughter you raised knows how to climb into the master's bed at a young age. You're 40 years old and still don't know anything. You're competing with your daughter-in-law. What kind of dogs are you two? Yarrow Chungu was scolded until his face turned red. He pointed at Madame Ma with a trembling finger. He wanted to refute but couldn't find the right words. It was even more impossible for him to fight back. In his life, he had never won against Madame Ma. At this time, Madame Ma had already grabbed his lapel and pulled out the 3 banknotes. I'm going to return the banknotes to the in-laws. I'm warning you, don't try to trick me. I just told Dai Fu that in a while, I'll move my luggage and live in Saiqing Garden until my great-grandson is born. If you have any ideas, be careful that I'll peel off your skin. You prodigal old woman. How can you, an old woman, live in your grandson's courtyard? Do you think I'll harm the Qin clan? Yarrow Chungu's heart was pierced by these words. His face turned red as he straightened his neck and roared. Madame Ma sneered, I've lived with you for a lifetime. Do you think I don't know you? You're also someone who has half of your body buried in the earth. Isn't it good to enjoy your old age? Why are you meddling in Dai Fu's affairs? And you? She turned around and grabbed Yarrow Chungu's collar and lifted him up. During this period of time, go to the side room and reflect on yourself. You're not allowed to come out without my permission. If you dare to go to Saiqing Garden, I'll break your legs. Madame Ma put one hand on her waist and grabbed Yarrow Chungu's collar with the other hand. She dragged him to the side room and loudly ordered the servants to close the door. She also said to the nanny beside her, Your old madam has hysteria. In order to prevent her from suddenly hurting people, let her recuperate in the side room. When she becomes a normal person, she can come out. The mama had been waiting outside the door for a long time and had clearly heard the conversation inside. Yarrow Shi was normally dignified and gentle, but in reality, she did not treat the servants as people. Seeing that the old madam wanted to punish Yarrow Shi, she happily nodded her head and said, Aya, old madam, for a woman of this age, her body is weak. She sweats during the night and gets angry at the slightest thing. There are quite a few that have hysteria. Later, we must find a good imperial physician to take a good look at old madam. Madame Ma nodded and turned back to point at Yarrow Chungu. The threat was obvious, and she turned around and left. Yarrow Chungu leaned against the door frame and trembled. He originally thought that although his wife was a daughter of the Jianghu, she was willing to accompany him to suffer. It could be said that she was deeply in love with him and he respected her very much. When he first opened the restaurant, he was only in charge of researching the dishes, while Madame Ma was in charge of managing everything. The restaurant's business was good because she knew how to win people over. Even if a robber came, Madame Ma could deal with him with a few punches and kicks. Yarrow Chungu was very satisfied with having a powerful wife. She was really good in the hall and the kitchen, not to mention that their grandson was Wang Yi now. But who would have thought that after being an old couple for a lifetime, they would fall out with each other for an outsider? Yarrow Chungu was angry, wronged, and depressed. He grabbed his hair and sighed, oh, and squatted on the ground. At this time, Qin Yining had just taken a dose of miscarriage prevention medicine prepared by Bing Tang and felt much better. She leaned against the soft satin pillow and stared blankly at the picture of 100 children and 1,000 grandchildren on the bed curtain. Pang Xiao sat beside her and asked cautiously, "Do you feel better?" "Much better." Qin Yining smiled. Although she was full of anger, Pang Xiao didn't do anything wrong. She wasn't a stupid woman who threw a tantrum at her man. She knew when and where to maintain her image and position in Pang Xiao's heart. She leaned forward with her elbows on her body and then lay down again with her head on his thigh. Pang Xiao hurriedly pulled the thin quilt for her and gently smoothed her messy long hair. "Sister Yi, don't be angry. I didn't handle the matter well this time. My grandfather and mother really thought too much. I'll explain it to them later. Don't worry too much. We don't need rent or anything like that." "I know." Qin Yining smiled and said, "I said it in a moment of anger. Now that I think about it, I feel regretful. I shouldn't have treated old master and mother-in-law like that. Look, you don't even call them grandfather and mother." Qin Yining smiled and said, "They don't treat me as family either. They suspect me." Pang Xiao and Qin Yining were smart people. How could they not see this? Looking at Qin Yining's tired face, they thought about how she had been suffering since the day she was with him. She didn't have a day of peace. Now that she was pregnant, her family even suspected her. Pang Xiao felt guilty and angry. He patted her shoulder helplessly and said, "Sister Yi, no matter what other people think, you and I are husband and wife. I believe in you and I know you. As for going to them, I'll explain it to them. I won't let something like today happen again. Don't be sad, okay?" Qin Yining nodded. A strand of long hair fell from her shoulder, down her snow-white neck, and scattered on Pang Xiao's leg. She looked so weak, and Pang Xiao's heart ached even more. He hated that he couldn't dig out his heart for her. "Okay, you have a good rest. I'm going out for a while. I'll be back soon." Qin Yining knew that he was going to Pine Crane Hall, so she moved back and watched him go out with a smile. Then she gradually stopped smiling and lay back down. She wasn't a weak person. Back then, the Sun Clan didn't treat her well. She endured it because the Sun Clan was her biological mother. The Yarrow clan and Yarrow Chungu suspected her. They drew a clear line between them. Although she was shocked at the time, she felt that it was human nature. There was nothing she couldn't understand. When she was young, she saw the selfish and ugly side of people. The Yarrow clan and Yarrow Chungu weren't bad people. They were just the most honest people. The Ma clan was sincerely good to her, so she returned the sincerity 100 times. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.